Chapter 21. The duel between Noah and Elisha only lasted for about 5 minutes before it ended. The two of them weren't too far away from the fairy tale guild. Thus, after about half an hour, Noah and Elisha returned to the guild. At this moment, Noah and Elisha both had a knight's sword in its scabbard at their waists. One of them was wearing an ordinary shirt, trousers, and a jacket, giving off a carefree aura. The other was wearing a cold armor, giving off a heroic aura. They looked like a pair. In addition to the 3 months of training together, Noah and Elisha's aura, posture, and pace had unknowingly reached the same state. If it wasn't for the fact that Noah's hair was black and not bright red, perhaps many people would have thought that the two of them were twins. Under such circumstances, the two of them directly returned to the guild and pushed open the guild door. Hearing the usual clamor inside and looking at the noisy scene in front of them, they looked at each other and smiled knowingly. Obviously, no matter if it was Noah or Elisha, they felt unusually close to the lively atmosphere of the fairy tale. Unfortunately, this amiable mood was quickly interrupted by a rude roar. Elisha, accompanied by this immature roar, a figure jumped up from the table in front of them. Like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey, it fiercely pounced towards Elisha, who was beside Noah. "Let's have a showdown." Hearing this, Elisha did not even lift her eyes, as if she was used to this scene. When the figure was not far from her, she nimbly shifted to the side and threw out a punch, heavily smashing the nose of the figure pouncing towards her. Pung! Ah! A muffled sound and a blood-curdling scream reverberated throughout the entire fairy tale guild. The figure that had pounced on Elisha was also sent flying to the side like a large piece of trash. Noah, who was standing beside Elisha, was not as expressionless as Elisha, who did not even lift his eyelids. However, when the figure pounced towards Elisha, he calmly took a step back. Thus, the figure that was supposed to hit Noah flew past less than 10 centimeters in front of Noah, fiercely smashing into the wall not far away. Pung! Immediately, a hole was smashed into the wall. The figure that pounced towards Elisha was directly embedded into the wall. Its eyes rolled back, mouth wide open, and slowly slid to the ground, smoke rising from its body. Really? At this time, Elisha finally sighed. "I don't really want to fight today, so let's not duel. Can you not wait until you're done fighting before saying this?" Noah could not help but cover his face. He then looked at Gray, who was only wearing a pair of shorts and had circles in his eyes. He felt that he had no strength left in his body. "Also, Gray, I think it's necessary to put on clothes first before proposing a duel, at least when your opponent is a girl." Stop nagging." Gray, whose eyes were still in circles, could only lie on the ground and moan with tears in his eyes. At this time, a voice sounded from the corner of the guild. So strong." Hearing this unfamiliar voice, Noah and Elisha both immediately looked towards the direction of the voice. They saw that in front of the guild's bar, a little boy who looked about 10 years old, younger than Noah and Elisha, with rare cherry-colored hair and a thick scarf around his neck, was standing there. There was a luggage bag beside him, and it was obvious that he had just arrived at the guild. "Hey, what's your name?" The cherry-colored little boy was very excited and jumped, pointing at Elisha, and said this unceremoniously. "You can actually take down that idiot in an instant. I'm interested in you now. Who are you calling an idiot?" Gray, who was lying weakly on the ground, immediately jumped up as if he was revived, the veins on his forehead popping out. "Do you want to fight? Hang your eyes. Forget it. Hang your eyes." The little boy laughed. "You can't even beat a girl. I'm not afraid of you." Gray's expression suddenly froze, and he couldn't move. Not only Gray, but everyone in the guild also fell silent at this moment, causing the surrounding atmosphere to be very oppressive. It was as if a scourge was about to be born, and they looked at Elisha with fear. Oh, Elisha's mouth slightly curved into a happy arc, but this expression made everyone in the guild, except for Noah, tremble in their hearts. "What's your name?" "Me." The little boy didn't seem to notice the change in the surrounding atmosphere, and he put his hands behind his head, revealing a bright smile. "My name is Naz Dolagner." Looking at the bright smile on the face of the little boy named Naz in front of him, Noah, who had been observing Naz, didn't know why, but his expression began to soften, as if he was basking in the soft sunshine, and he couldn't help but have a good impression of Naz. Not only Noah, Elisha, Gray, and everyone in the guild unconsciously approved of Naz under his bright smile, but they didn't show it on their faces. But they couldn't hide it from Noah, who was very familiar with everyone. Naz Dolagner? What an incredible person! Noah, who had a good impression of Naz because of his outstanding personality and charm, took the lead to show his good intentions to Naz, and smiled slightly. My name is Noah. Noah Dolagner. My name is Elisha. Elisha Shukalito. Noah and Elisha? Naz, who was extremely arrogant just a moment ago, raised his fingers and counted to 2 before smiling happily. Ignir, I've remembered 2 more names. Ignir? Noah asked curiously. Who is Ignir? Hearing these words, Naz puffed out his chest and said proudly, Igoniel is my father. He is the strongest dragon in the world. Dragon? Everyone in the fairy tale guild was collectively speechless. Dragon? Noah froze for a moment, then said in an uncertain tone. Naz, you mean your father is a dragon? Yes. Seeing everyone in the guild showing a doubtful look, Naz shouted angrily, as if he was insulted. I'm not lying. My magic was also taught to me by Iguniel. It's called Dragon Slayer magic. Everyone in Fairy Tale looked at each other in dismay. Although there were many excellent magic shooters in the Fairy Tale Guild, there were not many who were truly knowledgeable because of their style. However, they had heard of the Dragon Slayer magic. It was a magic that could transform the user's physique into that of a dragon, and was used to kill dragons. It was said that the magic shooters who used the Dragon Slayer magic would have the physique of a dragon. Their skin would be comparable to dragon scales, their claws would be comparable to dragon claws, and their teeth would be comparable to dragon fangs. They could eat substances that corresponded to the type of Dragon Slayer magic. They practiced to recover their physical strength, magic, and increase their strength. Magic used to fight against dragons? Needless to say, it was definitely a very powerful magic. Such a powerful magic. And now, there was a child younger than Noah and Elisha saying that she knew it. Who would not doubt it? Besides, the Dragon Slayer magic was a lost magic, an ancient magic that had been lost. It was a super rare type in ancient times. Now that it suddenly appeared in front of them, who would believe it? Only Noah's expression gradually became serious after sensing the magic on Naz's body. Chapter 22. In Noah's perception, Naz's magic power was like a chemical substance. Every element that made up this chemical substance seemed to be clearly presented in front of Noah's eyes and imprinted into Noah's perception. Therefore, while the rest of the people in the fairy tale guild were still skeptical about Naz's words, Noah almost believed Naz. To some extent, a person's magic power could also be seen as a person's aura. If magic power was compared to water, every individual with magic power was a different kind of water. But water was still water. This would not change. However, in Noah's perception, Naz's magic power gave him a different feeling from others. How should he put it? If he had to make a metaphor, Naz's magic power could probably be compared to ink. Although ink could also be regarded as a kind of water, it was different from other water, and definitely had its own taste. However, it could not be drunk, and had a smell that ordinary water did not have. Even its color was black. It could be seen at a glance that it was different from water. Now, Naz's magic power gave Noah this feeling. Even if it was still water, it was obviously different from the magic power of ordinary people. It was very special. Of course, there was nothing strange about it being special. After all, Naz learned the lost magic that had been passed down from ancient times and even lost. It was not unusual for his magic power to be different from others. It was extremely special. However, Noah couldn't ignore it. There was no other reason. It was just because the feeling that Naz's magic power gave Noah was too similar to the feeling of magic power that Noah felt from Laxus. It was the kind of magic power that seemed to hide a beast in his body. And Naz, who had this feeling of magic power, was the owner of Dragon Slayer magic. Could it be that Laxus? Just when a guess arose in Noah's mind, at the entrance of the guild, an old voice echoed throughout the guild. What Naz said is all true. Under the gaze of all the members of the Fairy Tale Guild, Makarov walked in from outside and said such a surprising sentence. Naz is indeed a magic shooter who learned the Dragon Slayer magic of fire. In other words, Naz is a magic shooter who slays dragons. Magic shooter who slays dragons. Everyone looked at Naz, who looked like he was about to cry just now, but now had a proud face. Is that true? Magic shooter who slays dragons? I didn't expect that this kind of ancient magic shooter would actually appear in the fairy tale. And it's a child. In addition to the magic shooters in the guild, Alessia said to Noah, who was next to her, with interest. That child called Naz seems to be quite powerful. The Dragon Slayer magic of fire? Gray, who was still lying on the ground, stared at Naz and grinned. He's quite interesting. He's a guy worth a fight. Humph. Naz was like a little person with a long nose, standing with his arms akimbo and chest out as he laughed loudly. How is it? Are you scared? Isn't this good? Alessia, who was somewhat restless, stepped forward with a smile on her face. Why don't we have a competition? Competition? Everyone present suddenly became noisy, looking as if they wanted to see the world in chaos. Not bad, not bad. How about the kid called Naz compete with Alessia? Let us see the power of a magic shooter who slays dragons. With you. Naz's eyes also lit up, and he jumped out with a face full of excitement. Good. I'll defeat you. This will prove that I'm stronger than that idiot. Idiot. For the first time, Gray didn't make trouble, but looked at Naz with pity. You'll know how terrifying Alessia is later. Under the instigation of all the members of the Fairy Tale Guild, Naz agreed without any surprise. Alessia also looked somewhat impatient. It seemed that she really had a little interest in the Dragon Slayer magic. Unfortunately, Alessia was destined to not be able to fight today. Alessia. Noah suddenly raised his head and said such a sentence. Why don't you give this competition to me? The whole place suddenly became quiet. Noah. Alessia looked at Noah with a face full of doubts. Are you an idiot? Gray directly showed a stunned expression. No matter how weak that idiot with the hedgehog head is, he's still a sorcerer. Noah, you haven't learned magic yet. Why are you jumping out here? Haven't learned magic yet? Naz was even more surprised. If you haven't learned magic, how are you going to fight me? Not to mention Alessia, Naz and Gray. Even the members of the Fairy Tale Guild were puzzled. Little Noah, don't be impulsive. Even if you want to fight with others, you have to wait until you learn magic, right? That's right, that's right. Let's wait until you learn magic first. Hearing this, Noah smiled but didn't say anything. His gaze directly met Naz's confused expression. How about it? Do you want to try? Seeing that Noah didn't have the slightest intention of giving up, everyone except Alessia started to discuss spiritedly. Naz. At this time Makarov spoke. You can try with Noah. Okay. Although he didn't know what was going on, Naz still clenched his fist hotly. Since Grandpa President has said so, don't regret it later. Hearing Naz's words, Noah didn't say anything. He slowly nodded his head, a look of interest flashing past his eyes. Just as Alessia said, Noah did indeed have an interest in the Dragon Slayer magic. Although it wasn't purely because the Dragon Slayer magic was a lost magic, or because it was a powerful magic used to fight against dragons. In the open space in front of the entrance of the Fairy Tale Guild, at this time, many people had formed a circle, surrounding two young teenagers. Do your best. Little Noah. Don't lose too. Dragon Slayer Sorcerer. Fight, fight. Okay. Standing in front of Noah, Naz looked at Noah, who was casually standing there with one hand holding the scabbard of the knight sword at his waist. He raised a fist, his face full of excitement. I'm coming. After saying that, a rather impressive magic slowly rose from Naz's raised fist, and a flame suddenly burned from Naz's fist. Under the gaze of everyone present, he shouted and rushed straight towards Noah. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. When Naz rushed to less than 2 meters in front of Noah, Naz jumped up and raised his fist high. The flame on it condensed slightly and fiercely punched towards Noah's chest. A light breeze blew the hair in front of Noah's forehead, exposing a pair of pitch-black, extremely deep eyes under Noah's bangs in front of Naz's eyes. Staring at the fist covered in flames When it was about to reach his chest, Noah took a step to the left unhurriedly. After 3 months of training, Noah's reflexes had been trained to be extremely outstanding. And in Noah's view, Naz's fist was simply too slow compared to Elisha's swift and violent slash. Thus, Noah's step just happened to dodge Naz's flame fist that was smashing towards him. His body slightly tilted, and his palm was like a needle, passing through Naz's arm, and very lightly imprinted on Naz's shoulder. Bang! With a muffled sound, Naz, who was hit by Noah's palm, was like being struck by lightning. With a groan, he flew back at a speed faster than when he came, and finally smashed into the ground not far away. He cried out in pain, and fell with his limbs in the air. The surrounding sound instantly disappeared. Chapter 23. Looking at Naz, who was knocked to the ground by Noah in one strike, the surrounding members of Fairy Tale were silent for a moment, before they quickly became restless. Is that for real? Isn't this Archmage of the Dragon Slayer too weak? No, Naz still has some skills. His magic power is also outstanding among his peers. Other than Elisha, only Gray in the guild can compare to Naz. In other words, it's not that Naz is too weak, but that Noah is too strong. I knew it. The chairman's grandson definitely won't only have the advantage of having powerful magic power. The Archmages of Fairy Tale kept clamoring. As members of the same guild, adults and Archmages, they could see how capable Naz was. Naturally, they could also see that Noah was the real deal. However, it was precisely because of this that the Archmage of the Dragon Slayer they were looking forward to was knocked down in one strike. This sudden unforeseen event caught everyone off guard. Below the stage, Gray's face was also filled with disbelief as he looked at Naz, who was knocked down. His mouth even formed a no shape. This guy, how did he become so strong? Makarov, who was standing slightly in front of the crowd, also opened his eyes wide. He looked at Noah, who was holding the scabbard of the knight sword at his waist with one hand, and didn't even change his position. He then looked at Elisha, who was beside him with a matter-of-fact expression, and couldn't help but smile. He's grown up. The surrounding clamor seemed to have woken Naz up. He flipped over, stood up, and fiercely glared at Noah. You actually dared to lie to me? Huh. Noah said blankly. When did I lie to you? You, Naz exclaimed in exasperation. You lied to me when you said you didn't know magic. First of all, I didn't say that. Second, even if I did, I didn't lie to you. Noah raised his hand and flipped it over, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. What I just used was just a very ordinary attack. It didn't even have a bit of magic. You can't be saying that this is magic, right? Naz choked, and then a burst of anger rose in his heart. Are you trying to say that you can beat me even if you don't know magic? Following Nazi's roar, a scorching flame suddenly ignited from Nazi's body and covered his entire body. Looking at the slight distortion of the air around Nazi, the temperature was definitely not low. It was much stronger than the fire fist that Nazi used just now. This change made the surrounding people cry out in surprise. Even Noah was surprised. He could clearly feel that with the anger on Nazi's face, the magic power in Nazi's body had more or less grown. Even the flames on his body had become much more vigorous, as if all the emotions in his heart had been transformed into flames. Nazi's Dragon Slayer magic can actually change according to Nazi's emotions? Is this the ancient lost magic? Watch me beat you down. Nazi was like a creeping cheetah. He bounced up fiercely, stomped his feet on the ground and rushed out. The flames on his body pulled out a long fire tail, rendering Nazi, who rushed out like a flaming meteor. Wherever he passed, stone chips and dust flew in all directions, and the temperature in the air rose sharply. Even Noah felt that his face had become a lot warmer. In the exclamations that had not yet dissipated, Nazi, who had turned into a flaming meteor, quickly rushed to Noah. The flames on his body gathered together, and he charged at Noah and slammed into him. Watch me. Fire Dragon Sword Horn. The sudden surge in strength made Nazi's attack bring about a strong oppressive wind, which made Noah's expression slowly condense. However, Noah didn't have the slightest intention of retreating. His right hand gently rested on the hilt of the knight's sword at his waist. Noah bent his body like a lion that was ready to attack. After a moment of silence, Like an arrow leaving the bow, he didn't retreat, but moved forward to meet the flaming meteor. Ha! Amidst the cold shout, a dazzling sword light suddenly appeared in the field under the shocked, astonished, and amazed gazes of the surrounding people. Like the waning moon at night, it seemed to be able to cut through space. Accompanied by a clear sword cry, it fiercely clashed with the flaming meteor. The expected fierce collision didn't appear. The waning moon-like sword light was like an illusory image. It directly swept through the flaming meteor, as if it was cutting through water. In the end, it swept out from the end of the flaming meteor's fiery tail. After the waning moon-like sword light swept out from the end of the flaming meteor, the sword light and the flaming meteor strangely disappeared at the same time. It was as if they never existed in the first place. In the center of the field, Noah still maintained his posture with one hand on the hilt of the knight sword at his waist. Nazi also maintained his posture like a creeping cheetah that was about to spring out. Both of them lowered their heads, and their expressions couldn't be seen clearly. It was as if nothing had happened. However, no one would believe that the scene just now was an illusion, because the temperature in the air still hadn't dropped, and the gravel and dust in the field hadn't dispersed. Noah and Nazi's positions were replaced by each other. They had their backs facing each other, which was completely opposite from the position they were in at the beginning of the confrontation. Around them, everyone in the fairy's tale subconsciously held their breaths and didn't make any more noise. Makarov, Elisha, and Gray also stared closely at the two people on the field. Their expressions were solemn as they watched quietly. Not long after, the silence in the field was broken. Ugh! Nazi, who had his back facing Noah, whimpered. His eyes drew circles as if he was drunk. His body swayed for a while before falling to the ground unconscious. Noah then raised his head and let go of the hilt of the knight's sword at his waist. He turned sideways and looked at the fallen Nazi. He made a V gesture in the direction of Makarov, Elisha and Gray. Clap, 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 clap. Only then did everyone present come to their senses. They laughed loudly and applauded loudly. Good job, little Noah. You've become stronger. What a powerful sword. As expected of the president's grandson, he's really different. The people here were all magic shooters from the fairy's tale. Even the weakest one was much stronger than Gray. Although not everyone knew what had just happened, most of them still knew. When Nazi's explosive attack that exceeded his full strength was about to land on him, Noah quickly pulled out his sword at a violent speed that most people on the field could only see a flash of sword light. He didn't retreat but advanced. When he brushed past the flaming meteor that Nazi had turned into, his sword hit Nazi's abdomen and made him unconscious. Seeing that Noah still maintained his sword-drawing posture after the attack, it was clear that after hitting Nazi, Noah returned his sword to the scabbard at a speed that couldn't be seen clearly. With all these factors added together, it resulted in the scene where the two of them exchanged positions and had their backs facing each other. Of course, looking at Nazi's unconscious appearance, Noah must have been merciful and didn't really slash him with his sword. Otherwise, Nazi would have at least bled. This guy, Gray, didn't hide his shock. He actually secretly became so strong by himself. He's really cunning. Makarov, who heard Gray talking to himself, laughed and turned his head to look at Elisha. I'm sorry to trouble you with Noah. It's all Noah's own efforts to have such outstanding sword skills. Elisha shook her head and smiled as she looked at Noah, who was surrounded by everyone in the field. Moreover, I've also received a lot of care. Makarov nodded with a smile. His gaze turned to Noah, and the look in his eyes gradually became peaceful. Do your best, my grandson. Chapter 24. Magnolia Forest Riverbank. Wang. The surge of mana caused the air to vibrate and expand like ripples, wrapping around the pitch-black beads and suspending them beside the owner of the mana. Noah's eyes were closed, and pitch-black beads covered in the light of magic floated around him. It was almost exactly the same as when he trained his magic power control in the past. However, in the next moment, Noah did something different. Noah opened his eyes abruptly, exposing his dark eyes that were as deep and dazzling as the stars in the sky. He gently raised his hands, as if he was trying to lift something up. His palms were facing upwards, and he couldn't help but raise them up. Wung wung wung. Following Noah's actions, the mana that surged out from Noah's body became denser and denser, causing the glow on the pitch-black beads to increase greatly. Then the pitch-black beads began to move. Chi-chi. In the extremely soft sound of breaking through the air, the pitch-black beads seemed to have a life of their own as they circled back and forth around Noah's body. They drew a beautiful trajectory, and their speed became faster and faster. Chi-chi chi-chi. Not long after, the entire forest riverbank was filled with the sharp sound of breaking through the air. Bang! Until a certain moment, two pitch-black beads that were circling back and forth at high speed suddenly collided with each other, making a dull sound of collision and bouncing off each other. Bang 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 bang. This collision seemed to have caused a chain reaction, as the dull sound of collision sounded one after another, causing the number of pitch-black beads circling around Noah's body to decrease gradually. It was unknown how long it took before it stopped. However, when it stopped, the number of pitch-black beads floating around Noah's body was only about 1/10 of what it was at the beginning. Clap 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 clap. Alusha, who had been watching from the side from the beginning to the end, applauded and praised. Your mana control is much stronger than before. It's really getting stronger and stronger. At this rate, it won't be long before you can completely control all of your mana, right? It's still early, Noah said, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve up. With this level of mana control, once I use all my mana, it's still possible for me to go berserk, isn't it? But at the very least, as long as you don't use all of your mana, you won't go berserk like you did in the guild. Alusha chuckled as she folded her arms. Or rather, before you learn magic, with your current mana control, it's unlikely for your mana to go berserk. This is a good thing. Like you said, this was before I learned magic. Noah stopped smiling inside. In the process of learning magic, every magic shooter will increase their mana, along with the improvement of their magic. My mana is already so strong that I can't completely control it. If it increases, I really can't stand it. When exactly can I start learning magic? Hearing Noah's sigh, Alusha felt strange. The strength of a magic shooter's mana was directly related to their strength. The stronger a person's mana was, the more powerful the spells they could cast would be, increasing their combat ability. The more mana a person had, the more time they could use spells, extending their combat time. Therefore, being able to increase one's mana was almost equivalent to increasing one's own strength. Therefore, the increase of mana had always been the dream of every magic shooter. It was also the main goal that every magic shooter inevitably needed to be immersed in on their path to increasing their own strength. In any case, being able to increase one's mana was definitely a good thing. Now, such a good thing coming out of Noah's mouth was like a disaster. Perhaps, he was the only one in the whole world who was like this. While feeling this way in her heart, Alusha said to Noah, "The president also said that with your hard work, it's only a matter of time before you can fully control your powerful magic. Learning magic is only a matter of time. Moreover, even if you don't know magic, you're not completely powerless now, right?" Hearing this, some of the awkward feelings in Noah's heart disappeared. He couldn't help but reach out and tighten his grip on the knight's sword at his waist. The expression on his face finally looked better. Today's training will end here. Alusha looked at the sky. It's time to show up in the guild. Noah nodded indifferently and walked in the direction of the guild with Alusha. Go to hell. Hang your eyes. You're the one who's going to die. Hang your eyes. When Noah and Alusha pushed open the door of the fairy tale guild and walked into the bar, two familiar voices filled with passion and anger sounded. Then, a series of crackling sounds of something being smashed and thrown could be heard. Although they didn't see the interior of the guild clearly, Noah and Alusha almost instantly knew what happened when they heard these voices. They looked at each other and sighed. Pervert. Hedgehog head. Exhibitionist. Stuffy bastard. Along with the extremely low level of curses, in the bar on the first floor of the guild, Naz and Gray were wrestling with each other, as if they had a life and death feud. Whether it was Naz or Gray, both of their faces were more or less bruised. Seeing this scene, not only did none of their companions in the guild come forward to stop the fight, they instead shouted, as if they were watching a show. Even Makarov was sitting at the bar, drinking and sighing. It's so good to be young. Seeing this, Noah sighed again. Alusha. Understood. Alusha stepped forward expressionlessly and came to the side of Naz and Gray, who were wrestling with each other. They didn't notice Alusha approaching them. She stretched out her hand and accurately pressed Naz and Gray's heads. Stop it now. After saying that, Alusha directly pushed Naz and Gray apart. No, it wasn't just a separation. Yua. The overly strong force directly pushed the two boys who were around 30 kilograms away. Their necks made a kacha sound that made one's scalp numb, as they laid on the ground in pain. How about you guys stop for a day? Noah walked to Alusha's side and looked at Naz and Gray, who were lying on the ground with a headache expression on his face. You guys fight all day long and I don't see a winner. Shut up. Naz jumped up energetically, and then noticed that the person who spoke was Noah. His eyes immediately shone. Noah, let's fight it out. Alusha. Gray also jumped up. Why don't you fight me as well? After saying that, the two jumped up at the same time and pounced in the direction of Noah and Alusha, who were standing together in the middle. However, one pounced on Noah and the other pounced on Alusha. Seeing that Naz and Gray pounced on them without saying anything, Noah and Alusha's expressions collapsed. When Naz and Gray pounced on them, they raised their hands at the same time and formed a hand-knife shape. They released a heavy blow that ordinary people couldn't see at the opponent's abdomen, who challenged them unilaterally. Bang! Oh! Naz and Gray, who were directly hit in the abdomen by a hand knife, had their eyes protruded out. After their bodies froze for a while, they softly fell to the ground and couldn't get up anymore. Ha 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 ha. The people around them all laughed exaggeratedly. Naz and Gray were fighting and were immediately stopped by Alusha. After that, the two were unwilling to be outdone and challenged Noah and Alusha at the same time. However, they were knocked down by Noah and Alusha in one move. Now it happened almost every day. Should I say, is this really the style of this guild? Chapter 25. On the other side, Makarov, who was sitting at the bar, looked at the scene of Naz and Gray being defeated by Noah and Alusha in one move. He paused in his action of raising the glass to his mouth, and a hint of hesitation appeared in his eyes, but it disappeared immediately. Noah, Alusha. Makarov, who had made up his mind, put the glass in his hand on the bar next to him, and waved to Noah and Alusha. You two come here, I have something to say to you. Noah and Alusha, who were about to preach to Naz and Gray, were startled at the same time. They looked at Makarov with a puzzled face, and habitually looked at each other, seeing the puzzlement and curiosity in each other's eyes. Noah, who came to Makarov with Alusha, tilted his head and asked, Grandpa, what's wrong? Is there anything we can help with? No, it's about your own matters. Makarov burped with the smell of alcohol, and said something that surprised Noah and Alusha with this sloppy look. I just want to ask you, do you want to start officially accepting commissions and go out to work? Work. Noah and Alusha's eyes lit up. Work. The others in the guild also exclaimed, and even the half-dead Naz and Gray jumped up. The so-called magic shooters were, in fact, a special group of people who could use mana and release magic. Generally speaking, as long as one could use magic proficiently, no matter what kind of magic it was, this person could be called a magic shooter. However, for magic shooters, they were more inclined to be able to use magic and join a guild. Only then would they be considered a proper magic shooter. After all, magic shooters had to complete all kinds of work to earn remuneration. A proper guild that could accept commissions from all over the Fiori Kingdom and provide options for the magic shooters in the guild was naturally indispensable. That was why there was such an unspoken rule. So strictly speaking, Noah, who had not started learning magic, could not be considered a proper magic shooter, even though he had joined the guild. As for Alusha, she was already quite proficient in using magic, and was even better than the average adult magic shooters. In addition, she also had excellent swordsmanship and skills in using various weapons. In a way, she was more mature than Noah on the path of a magic shooter. However, even so, Makarov did not allow Alusha to accept commissions and go out to work. Instead, He allowed Alusha to improve her abilities first. When she had a certain ability and could take charge of things independently, he would then admit that Alusha had the ability to go out to work. Before that, Alusha's living expenses were paid by the guild. When Alusha was able to go out to work, she would use her remuneration to pay for it. Therefore Alusha, who could use magic proficiently, and was a member of the fairy tale, could be called a magic shooter. However, to the internal members of the guild, a child who could not work was naturally not considered a mature magic shooter. Even Alusha was like this, not to mention Noah, who had not started learning magic. Now Makarov's words were admitting that Noah and Alusha already had the ability to accept commissions, go out to work, and take charge of things independently. How could Noah and Alusha not be happy? How could the rest of the fairy tale not be surprised? After all, even Laxus waited until he was 13 years old before Makarov admitted that he had the ability to take charge of things independently and allowed him to accept commissions from the guild and go out to work. Grandpa. Thus, after the excitement, Noah, who had calmed down first, had a look of worry on his face. Is it okay to let us go out to work now? Hearing Noah's words, Alusha, Naz, Gray, and the rest of the guild reacted. I know what you are worried about, but since I asked this, it naturally means that you have a certain degree of ability and can take charge of things independently. Otherwise, how could I allow you to go out to work so easily? In front of everyone in the guild, Makarov jumped down from the bar counter and put his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at Alusha. Alusha, although your equipment changing magic is very common, your mastery of magic is not inferior to some of the magic shooters in the guild. Moreover, you have outstanding swordsmanship. Even the magic shooters in the guild do not have this ability. The average magic shooters are no longer your opponent. After saying this, Makarov looked at Noah, who had been staring at him, and smiled until his eyes narrowed into slits. As for Noah, although you have not officially started learning magic, you have already developed swordsmanship that is not inferior to Alusha's in this period of time. Even if your ability is not as good as Alusha's when she goes all out, it is not far off. Makarov vaguely glanced at the knight's sword that he had given to Noah at his waist. He made up his mind and nodded at Noah. In the situation where you have not yet learned how to use magic, you already have the ability that the average magic shooters cannot compare to. Accepting missions and going out for a walk can also broaden your horizons and increase your experience. It will be of great importance to the progress of your ability in the future. Therefore, you should also have some confidence in yourself. Hearing this, Noah fell silent. President. After a while, Alusha spoke with a stern expression. Please let me go out to work. It seemed that Alusha had already made her decision, and Alusha's decision also made the trace of hesitation in Noah's heart disappear. He took a deep breath and nodded at Makarov. Grandfather, no, President, I have also decided to officially accept missions and go out to work. Please allow me. Very good. Makarov grinned. Then from today onwards, the two of you officially have the right to accept missions and go out to work. The mission form will be posted on the mission board. You can take a look at it yourselves. If you like it, just tear off the form and come to me to go through the procedures. Yes. Seeing that the two youngest magic shooters in the guild were born just like that, everyone in the guild sent their blessings. Although Noah and Alusha were still young, their strength was obvious to all. They could deal with Naz and Gray, who were only 1 or 2 years younger than them, cleanly every time. In addition, there were a few duels from time to time. Everyone also admitted that Noah and Alusha had the strength to rival real magic shooters. Go out to work? Naz shouted with a face full of excitement. It sounds pretty good. It's still too early for you. Gray's eyes were also filled with envy, but more of it was sarcasm toward Naz. If you accept the mission, I'm afraid that even the client won't care about you. What did you say? Droopy Eyes idiot. I'm talking about you. Droopy Eyes Bast *RD. In an instant, Naz and Gray, who were filled with envy and jealousy, started fighting again. Let's start with simple missions at the beginning, Makarov advised after explaining some of the necessary precautions to Noah and Alusha. After all, you're still young and inexperienced. Even if you're willing to take on high-level missions, the client won't be willing to hire you. Let's start with simple missions, preferably those that are more suitable for you. Noah and Alesha nodded one after another, which made Makarov smile. Of course, you can also choose to team up first. It's good to have a companion by your side. Team up. Noah and Alesha looked at each other at the same time, and then as if they saw through each other's heart, they smiled tacitly. Not for the time being. Noah gave the answer directly. Grandpa, you just said that we have to familiarize ourselves with the work first. So let's do it alone for the first time. Of course, we'll start with simple. All right. Makarov didn't object. Noah and Alesha said a few words to each other and found their favorite missions. Chapter 26. Fairy Tale was the #1 magic guide guild in the Fiori Kingdom. In terms of scale and strength, there were less than 5 guilds in the Fiori Kingdom that could compete with Fairy Tale. Naturally, Fairy Tale would receive many quests from all over the Fiori Kingdom every day, and there were all kinds of quests. Noah, who was standing in front of the quests, saw simple quests such as finding some items, chasing away thieves or hooligans, slightly difficult quests, such as removing curses that required the use of magic, and even more difficult quests, such as annihilating illegal magic shooter organizations and harming magical creatures, etc. Generally speaking, the harder the quest, the higher the reward. Needless to say, the more life-threatening the quest, the higher the reward would be. However, these quests were not within the scope of Noah's consideration, as he had just been able to go out to work. After discussing with Alesha, the two of them decided that the difficulty of their first quest could not be too high, and it could not be too far away. Otherwise, if they were alone, there would be all kinds of trouble. Whether there would be danger or not, there was no guarantee in terms of efficiency. Therefore, those quests that required them to go to distant places and were more dangerous, as well as those quests that required the use of magic, were all eliminated by Noah. Alesha had unknowingly torn down a list of quests and went to Makarov to receive the quest, preparing to go out to work. Noah, on the other hand, looked at the list of quests for a while before fixing his gaze on one of them. He stretched out his hand and tore down the list of quests. Have you decided? Makarov, who had been standing behind Noah, nodded his head when he saw the quest that Noah had chosen. This quest seems a little strange, but the difficulty shouldn't be too high. However, you still have to be careful. If you find that you can't solve it, or if you feel that it's dangerous, don't try to be brave and just give up the quest. You're still young. Hearing Makarov's words, Noah nodded, but his hand tightly grasped the letter of commission in his hand. His heart was slightly surging. The blue sky was boundless. The green field full of vitality was bottomless. In the endless green field, at the end of a walkway, an 11 or 12-year-old boy was carrying a long cloth bag on his shoulder, as if he was carrying an ankle-length backpack. He carried it on his shoulder strap with one hand, and held a piece of paper with the other as he walked forward. Along the way, many people who were grazing in the green field cast curious, doubtful, and scrutinizing gazes at the young man walking on the walkway. Perhaps they were all wondering in their hearts which family's child had gone missing. In fact, along the way, Noah did encounter many kind-hearted people who came to ask if they were lost, or if they were touched by human traffickers who came out of nowhere, making Noah feel quite helpless. However, this kind of encounter ended here. At a certain moment, Noah came to a halt and looked ahead. A village. It was a village not too far from Magnolia. At least, even if Noah didn't take a car, he still walked to his destination, although it took a lot of time. Looking at the village not far in front of him, and then looking at the letter of commission in his hand, Noah once again confirmed that his destination was this village in front of him. This time the commission was issued by the village chief of this village. Generally speaking, the commissions issued by a small village like this were either to chase away some wild beasts or bandits, or to search for medicinal herbs and medicinal materials for curing diseases. There were very few commissions that were difficult or dangerous. Therefore, Noah chose to accept the commission issued by this village. Of course, Noah also confirmed the content of the commission. How to put it? He didn't know if it was difficult or not. But he didn't know if it was easy or not. Anyway, it was a little strange. With this kind of feeling, Noah was led by a villager to a house and met the village chief. The village chief was an old man, perhaps even older than Makarov. He leaned on a cane, bent over, and his white beard dragged directly to the ground. The old man first sized up Noah, then said in a long tone, "Welcome, guest from Fairy Tale." Seeing this, Noah couldn't help but look at the old man in front of him a little higher. Just now, Noah clearly saw a trace of suspicion in the old man's eyes. Obviously, the old man was puzzled that the magic shooter who came to his village to solve his village's problem was actually such a young child. But even so, the old man didn't say anything, nor did he want to confirm anything with him. First, he expressed his welcome, and didn't have the slightest bit of dissatisfaction because of his young age. Noah didn't know if the old man chose to believe in his ability to complete the mission because he was a member of Fairy Tale, or if the old man wanted to use peaceful means before resorting to force. In short, the old man didn't make things difficult for Noah at first, which made Noah feel a lot more relaxed. Although the key to activating the Ritual Lake mission was Noah, the contact, conversation, and negotiation with the client was basically done by Laxus. Because of this, strictly speaking, this was the first time Noah was working independently, and he couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The old man's actions dispelled this little bit of nervousness and made Noah's heart feel lighter, and he greeted the old man. "Hello, village chief. I am a magic shooter from Fairy Tale, and I am here to help you solve your problem." "Thank you very much for your help." The village chief nodded his head very slowly. "Although the scale of our village isn't big, we still provide 1 or 2 inns for guests on the journey. If there is a need, we will entertain you for free. Do you need to rest first? It is indeed a little late now, and not very suitable for work. If you can let me rest for a night, I would be very grateful. But before that, I have some questions that I would like to ask the village chief." Noah held up the commission in his hand and asked with a little uncertainty in his tone. "The commission clearly states that the task is to drive away ghosts. What is this all about?" "Yes, drive away ghosts." This was the question that Noah found inconceivable. Although this was a world where magic was quite prevalent, and even integrated into people's daily lives, there were also some magical creatures that could endanger people's lives. Noah had even heard Makarov say that there were demons in this world. But ghosts and whatnot, did they really exist? Perhaps they did exist, but Noah had never seen them before, so it was inevitable that he would feel some doubts. Not to mention Noah, even if it was someone else, they would probably be filled with doubts like Noah. After all, some of the ancient villages did not have as much knowledge as the residents of the towns and cities outside. Sometimes, it was not impossible for some special phenomena, the activities of weak magical creatures, and the tricks of humans with bad intentions to really be ghosts. If this was really the case, this task would not be difficult to solve. But he was afraid that there was something else that Noah could not solve. Therefore, Makarov's suggestion was only to come and take a look. If there was anything wrong, this type of commission was allowed to be abandoned. No matter what, if there were really ghosts causing trouble, Noah did not have the means to drive them away, right? Therefore, it was necessary to ask clearly. It was not known if the village chief also understood this point, but seeing that Noah directly asked about work, he started to explain slowly. Actually, not long ago, the villagers who went into the forest to hunt often heard the sound of ghosts crying. Chapter 27. Actually, not too long ago, the villagers who went hunting in the forest often heard the sound of a spirit crying. With this as the starting point, the village chief began to explain. Not too far away from the village, there was a forest that was rarely visited by humans. There wasn't anything special about this forest, unlike the forest beside Villa Magnolia, where there were all kinds of magical creatures. This was just a normal forest. At most, there were only a few wild beasts or weak magical creatures. Because of this, the village treated this forest as a hunting ground. Every day, they would go hunting in the forest, and it was the main source of food for the village. Not too long ago, When many villagers went hunting in the forest, they could faintly hear the sound of a girl crying. At first, the villagers thought that it was a child who had mistakenly entered the forest and wanted to find the child and bring her out. Who knew? Before the villagers could begin to search for the child, a strange phenomenon occurred. Noah naturally didn't know what the strange phenomenon was. But according to the village chief, there was a hole in the sky. Because of this strange phenomenon, the villagers didn't continue to search for the child. But since then, they could still hear the sound of the child crying in the forest from time to time. Moreover, there would always be a hole in the sky from time to time, which made people's hair stand on end. Thus, the saying that the crying child in the forest was a spirit that would bring a curse when she cried, and the spirit that caused the sky to crack spread throughout the village. The villagers in the village were relatively simple people, and they didn't doubt this saying at all. Thus gradually, the villagers didn't dare to enter the forest to hunt anymore. This caused the village, which used the prey in the forest as their main source of food, to not have as much food as before, which caused quite a bit of trouble. With no other choice, the village chief could only send out a request to the nearest magic guide guild and invite someone to banish the spirit. To be more precise, it should be to find the true source of the crying and the truth behind the crack in the sky, so that the village could return to its previous state. The reward was pooled together by the villagers. Although it's not much, only 200,000 J, we still want to ask for your help. The village chief slightly lowered his head and bent his waist. For his age, this kind of bow was already the limit. Can you accept our request? Noah frowned slightly and fell silent. It wasn't that Noah didn't want to accept the commission, but the commission itself had too many uncertainties. Noah didn't know if he could complete the commission by himself. As for the reward, for such an uncertain mission, it was neither too much nor too little. It could only be said that as long as there were no accidents, the reward would be considerable. Moreover, Noah didn't care much about the reward. In terms of money, he still had the 1 million J reward from the last activation of the Ritual Lake mission. He wasn't in a hurry to use money, so he didn't need to care too much about the reward. After pondering for a while, Noah said, "To be honest, village chief, there are too many uncertainties in this case. We can't be sure if it was the spirit that caused the sky to crack. I can't guarantee that I can provide help to all of you, so I would like to stay in the village for the night and go to the forest to take a look tomorrow. Is that okay?" "Yes, thank you very much." The village chief's voice was a little more relaxed, which made Noah smile. He tightened the long cloth bag on his shoulder like a backpack and began to think about what he should pay attention to for tomorrow's mission. As a village, although the scale of this village wasn't big, it wasn't very backward. Although the houses were a little old compared to the buildings in Magnolia, the style was almost the same, unlike some villages that only had stone houses. The inn provided to Noah was a little small, but it was impeccable. There was nothing to complain about. Under the village chief's instructions, the owner of the inn also knew that Noah was a magic shooter from Fairy Tale. He had specially come to help the village solve the problem caused by the spirit, so he didn't charge Noah for the accommodation. However, unlike the village chief, when the owner of the inn found out that the sorcerer who came from Fairy Tale was such a child, although he did not say anything, there was an unconcealable disappointment in his eyes, which made Noah quite gloomy. Let's hope tomorrow's mission can be completed smoothly. With this thought in mind, Noah settled down a little and came out of the room. He sat down at a wooden table in the inn's lobby, ordered some food, and began to replenish the energy he had expended during the day's travel. However, just as Noah was enjoying his dinner, 3 people came to the entrance of the inn. They were about 11 or 12 years old. They should be the same age as Noah, but they were very eye-catching. As for why, it was because these 3 boys and girls around the age of 11 or 12 all had a head of eye-catching white hair. Standing in the middle was a girl with long white hair tied into a ponytail. She was wearing a revealing swimsuit. Her face was very ugly, and her eyes were very fierce. Standing on the left of the girl was a boy who was wearing a formal suit and shorts like a student. His figure was considered tall and sturdy among his peers. His skin was a little dark, but his face had a weak expression. It was a sharp contrast to the ponytailed girl. It made people wonder if there was a mistake. As for the one standing on the right of the girl, it was a little girl who was the shortest and looked the youngest. She had the head of a little sister and was wearing a cute dress. At this time, the little girl with the head of a little sister was saying something to the ponytailed girl with a face full of worry. But the ponytailed girl turned a deaf ear. The tall and sturdy boy also seemed to be trying to persuade the ponytailed girl with a weak face. As a result, the ponytailed girl glared fiercely at him. He shrunk his head and hid to the side without any backbone. His face looked as if he was about to cry, which made people unable to help but laugh. This strange trio naturally attracted Noah's attention. He immediately slowed down his eating speed and observed them with interest. Just as Noah was observing the three white-haired boys and girls, the ponytailed girl seemed to have noticed Noah's gaze. She turned her head and her gaze met with Noah's. Noah could clearly see that the other party's face was clearly unhappy. It was obvious that she did not like Noah's gaze. Just as she was about to glare at Noah, she noticed the fairy tale guild emblem on the back of Noah's right hand. The ponytailed girl was startled, and then a puzzled expression appeared on her face. It was as if she was painstakingly looking for someone, but in the end found that the person she was looking for did not match the appearance of the person she was looking for. However, the ponytailed girl quickly threw this to the side. Ignoring the advice of the weak boy and the worried girl, she walked towards Noah's direction. Seeing this, no matter how stupid Noah was, he could guess it. The other party was coming for him. Hey! As expected, the ponytailed girl directly arrived in front of Noah's table and asked very rudely, "You are the sorcerer of fairy tale? The person who came to resolve the ghost incident in the forest beside this village?" The ponytailed girl's tone sounded like she was looking for trouble, causing Noah to frown deeply. He put down the cutlery in his hand. "Sister Mira." At this moment, the girl with the head of a younger sister, wearing a cute one-piece dress, came over. She pulled on the ponytailed girl's arm, as if trying to mediate a fight. She lowered her head deeply to Noah and apologized profusely. I'm sorry. Sister Mira did not mean any harm. I'm really sorry." The tall and sturdy boy also came over and bowed fiercely to Noah. "My sister really did not mean any harm. Please don't blame her." Noah nodded at the three of them. There was no anger in his tone. "May I ask why you are looking for me?" "My name is Mira Jenny Strauss." The young girl named Myra's delicate face curled into a sinister smile as she said these words. "Although I'm very sorry, your job is now ours." Chapter 28. Mira Jenny Strauss. That was the name of the girl who exuded the aura of a bad girl. Elfman Strauss. That was the name of the burly youth with the weak aura. Lisanna Strauss. That was the name of the little girl, who seemed like an obedient little sister. It was easy to tell the relationship between the three, just by looking at their surnames. In fact, the three of them were indeed siblings. Of course, Noah only found out about this after the fact, including Elfman and Lisanna's names. As for now, Noah was only dumbfounded. "My job belongs to you guys." Noah looked at Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna with a confused expression on his face. After a while he opened his mouth and said, "What's the matter?" "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you mean. Can you explain it more clearly?" "I think what I said just now has explained everything very clearly." Mira put her hands on her hips and looked down at Noah. Her delicate face was not inferior to Alusha's, but it was filled with contempt that destroyed her beauty. "Moreover, looking at you, I don't think you have the ability to solve this ghost incident. So be smart and give us the job." At this point, Myra's words were no longer as simple as being arrogant and looking for trouble. Instead, she had offended him. Therefore, even Noah, who was very good at controlling his emotions, couldn't help but feel a little displeased with Myra's words. He unconsciously reached out his hand and touched the long cloth bag at the side. He looked at Mira, and the corners of his lips curled up. "You mean to say that you have the ability to solve this matter, even though you're about the same age as me?" Hearing this, Mira did not respond to Noah's words immediately. Instead, he glanced at the strip-shaped cloth bag that Noah was stroking. He still had a sinister expression on his face, but a hint of vigilance secretly rose in his heart. After all, it wasn't difficult for people to guess what was inside a cloth bag of this shape. However, Mira didn't have the slightest intention of letting him off. You think you're a magic shooter just because you're armed? It's pretty easy to be a magic shooter for fairy tale. Noah, who had just turned a blind eye to Myra's words, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze towards Mira began to turn cold, and even the mana in his body began to boil a little. Can I take it that you're provoking fairy tale? Ever since he was adopted by Makarov, Noah had lost control of his emotions a few times in fairy tale, causing the mana in his body to go berserk, and almost destroyed the entire fairy tale. Noah constantly reminded himself that he had to remain calm no matter what happened. This was also the reason why Noah, at such a young age, was able to display a calmness that even adults couldn't possess. It was also because of this that Laxus, who usually didn't get along with Noah, would target Noah. Noah's emotions weren't easily affected by Laxus, which made Laxus somewhat annoyed, or rather, somewhat afraid of his younger brother. His attitude towards Noah was extremely bad. With Laxus's character, he wouldn't admit that he was somewhat afraid of his younger brother, who wasn't easily affected. This was why he targeted Noah every time, attempting to break Noah's calmness that even he was somewhat afraid of. Therefore, if Laxus was present, he would definitely know that there were only 3 factors that could affect Noah's emotions. The first was regarding Makarov, who had raised Noah. The second was causing harm to the people close to Noah. The third was any insult to the fairy's tale. It could be said that Myra's words had unintentionally triggered Noah's emotions. Mira seemed to have felt a flash of mana from Noah's body. Her heart tightened, and her body stiffened slightly. Although it was only for a moment, when she felt that flash of mana from Noah's body, a sense of danger arose in her heart. Sister Mira. Lisanna didn't seem to have felt anything. When she saw Noah's gaze turn cold, she hurriedly grabbed Myra's hand and lowered her head to Noah. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Please don't be angry, Elfman said with a nervous expression. But he still spoke up. We really don't mean any harm. They were already here looking for trouble, and they still didn't mean any harm? If it was anyone else, they would have definitely lost their cool and started fighting with the trio in front of them. Fortunately, Noah wasn't someone who acted rashly. He took a deep breath and calmed his slightly fluctuating emotions, looking straight at the trio in front of him. I roughly understand why you're here. You want to take on the mission issued by this village, right? Mira snorted coldly and turned her head away, as if she didn't want to explain anything. Elfman nodded repeatedly, while Lisanna seemed to be a little angry at her sister's actions. The 3 siblings' reactions were so different that Noah couldn't help but feel a little helpless. I just want to ask. Noah stared at the trio in front of him. Were you sent by the ruler of the underworld, Phantom's Lord? Ruler of the underworld, Phantom's Lord? Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna were all stunned, somewhat at a loss. Seeing this, Noah knew that the 3 siblings weren't sent by the ruler of the underworld, Phantom's Lord. Just like the last time, they were here to make things difficult for Fairy Tale. Then, why are you stealing my job? Noah directly asked. I don't think I've offended you, right? Hearing Noah's words, Elfman and Lisanna actually lowered their heads, looking somewhat guilty. Mira was the only one who didn't hold back. You don't need to know that. Anyway, you're a magic shooter of Fairy Tale. Just go back to the guild and change your mission. Leave the mission here to us. Noah raised an eyebrow and ignored Mira, turning his gaze to Lisanna. He could see that among the 3 siblings, Mira was the standard delinquent girl, and it was hard to communicate with her reasonably. Elfman's personality was rather weak, and even if he was asked he would only stutter. Only this youngest girl called Lisanna was easier to talk to, and wouldn't ask so many questions. I'm really sorry. Lisanna's first sentence was still an apology, and her cute face was full of regret. But we really need this mission. If possible, I hope you can give it to us. Lisanna, why are you saying so much to him? Mira looked at Noah with an unkind expression. Kid, I said before that your job is ours. If you don't want to be beaten up by me and then run back home, just give up. Sister Mira. Lisanna's tone was full of anger and helplessness. Obviously, she was already very hurt by her sister's bad attitude. Noah sighed, picked up the long cloth bag at the side and stood up. Although I don't know why you're saying that you need this mission, I'm guessing that you've gone to the village chief's house and been told that I've already accepted the mission. That's why you're looking for me and hoping that I'll give up, right? After saying that, Noah put on a mischievous smile and said, "Since that's the case, then try to steal my job." After saying that, without waiting for Mira and the others to say anything, Noah ran out. "Don't run." Elfman and Lisanna were shocked, and Mira was so agitated that she cried out, grabbing one in each hand and running out of the door. Chapter 29. Night fell quietly. In this world completely shrouded in darkness, all signs of life seemed to have been erased. Even the vast forest that was full of vitality couldn't escape the engulfment of the darkness. When night fell completely, Noah arrived at the entrance of the forest that was engulfed in darkness. Looking at the vast forest that stretched as far as the eye could see, he sighed in his heart. If possible, Noah really didn't want to carry out the mission of dispelling ghosts at night. Although Noah wasn't afraid of ghosts, that didn't mean that he liked ghosts. Therefore, in the face of an unknown existence like a ghost, even if Noah didn't know whether it actually existed or not, he still hoped to carry out this mission during the day. At least his mood would be a lot more relaxed. Unfortunately, the appearance of the three Strauss siblings disrupted Noah's plan. To be honest, although the three Strauss siblings' request was somewhat unreasonable, Mira was right. For Noah, who was the magic shooter of Fairy Tale, it wasn't a big deal even if he gave up on this mission. At most, he would just return to the guild and get another one. Didn't Makarov also say that if there was no way to complete the mission, there was no need to force it and just give up? The Strauss siblings seemed to have some reason to need this commission. If it were another situation, Noah wouldn't mind giving this commission to them, not for the sake of the arrogant Mira and the timid Elfman, but for the sake of the cute little girl Lisanna, who was reasonable. Noah didn't mind giving this commission to them. However, this was Noah's first real job. If he encountered a setback in his first job and had to give up on the mission, Noah would inevitably feel disappointed and even lose confidence in himself. Not to mention, he didn't encounter any setbacks that forced him to give up on the mission. It was just a few people who came out and said that they wanted to steal his job. Not to mention, they had that kind of attitude. Looking back, Noah confirmed that Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna hadn't caught up with him. He carried his strip-shaped bag and walked into the forest. The forest at night was very dangerous. In the more than a year in Magnolia, Noah ran into the forest almost every day to train his control of mana and swordsmanship. Therefore, Noah knew very well how dangerous the forest at night was. Other things aside, many of the truly dangerous magical creatures were frequently active at night in search of prey. Coupled with the restrictions of terrain and vision, the forest at night was often very advantageous to magical creatures. On the contrary, it was very disadvantageous to humans. Fortunately, this forest wasn't full of magical creatures like the forest in Magnolia. At most, there were some ferocious beasts. There was a chance of magical creatures appearing. However, the monsters in this type of forest were usually outsiders. Their numbers were pitifully small, and their strength was uneven. After all, powerful magical creatures were generally able to occupy a place where they lived, and some even occupied an entire territory. Only the weak magical creatures would be chased out of their habitat, or escape in search of other places. Under such circumstances, this forest wasn't considered dangerous. Even the villagers of a small village often came here to hunt. Noah believed that he could handle such a forest at night. Currently it was summer in the Fiori Kingdom. However, the temperature in the forest was quite chilly. It was hard to believe that it was summer. At night, the atmosphere in the forest was different from during the day. It was as if there was an additional cold air that made one's hair stand on end. As Noah walked into the depths of the forest, he breathed in the gloomy and cold air. A sense of nostalgia inexplicably rose in his heart. No, it wasn't strange at all, because Noah used to visit the forest at night in Magnolia. The forest in front of him seemed to be connected to the scene in his memory, which made Noah feel nostalgic. However, compared to the forest in Magnolia, which was full of magical creatures, this forest was undoubtedly much more reassuring. For example, there wouldn't be the pungent smell of magical creatures here. For example, there wouldn't be insects larger than a human falling from the trees here. For example, there wouldn't be strange birds chirping here. For example, there wouldn't be spiders the size of a fist running around here. At most, there would be snakes crawling on the road, or owls with glowing eyes hiding in the trees. Thinking about these strange things, and comparing the forest in Magnolia to the forest here, Noah unknowingly began to walk around aimlessly. It couldn't be helped. The village chief said that there would be spirits crying in this forest from time to time, but he didn't say exactly where to hear these cries. This wasn't strange. After all, Noah told the village chief that he would only carry out the mission tomorrow. If that was the case, the village chief would have explained in detail before he set off tomorrow. Thinking about this, Noah was a little annoyed. If he had known this would happen, he would have gone to the village chief's house first. Woo woo woo. Just as Noah was immersed in his own annoyance and was about to sigh, a crying sound came from the surroundings, which made Noah freeze on the spot. Woo woo woo. Before Noah could fully react, the crying sound became clearer and clearer, which woke Noah up from his stupor. At this time, Noah noticed two details. First, the crying sound was very young. The owner of the crying sound was definitely not more than 10 years old, and it was a female voice. Second, in addition to the crying sound gradually approaching Noah's direction, there was also a faint sound of footsteps coming from the depths of the forest. It should be the footsteps of the owner of the crying sound. It wasn't hard to imagine that the other party was crying while walking. Footsteps. Noah tilted his head in puzzlement. Isn't it a spirit? Do spirits need to walk and make footsteps? With such doubts in his mind, Noah carried the long cloth bag and leaped, silently hiding in the trees to the side. His gaze was cast forward, looking in the direction of the crying and footsteps. After an unknown amount of time, a very small figure slowly walked over from the depths of the forest, imprinted in Noah's eyes. It was a little girl. She was about 7 or 8 years old, 4 or 5 years younger than Noah. The little girl had a head of dark blue short hair that was unusually eye-catching even in the dark night. She wore an extremely thin shirt, and it was definitely very cold in the forest at night. However, the little girl was completely unaware of it, and didn't see her body shivering from the cold. Instead, she lowered her head and rubbed her eyes, crying nonstop as she walked over. Woo woo woo. Grandini, where are you? It's so dark here. I'm so scared. Listening to the heart-wrenching cries and watching the little child walking towards them while crying, Noah was really confused. Was this a spirit? She didn't look like one at all, did she? Could it be that the crying in the forest was actually this child, and not some spirit? Didn't that mean that this child had been crying in the forest all this time? Noah fell silent, and after a while he walked outside. The little girl seemed to have noticed the strange sounds around her. Her crying stopped abruptly, and she wiped the tears off her face. She looked around in panic, and then hurriedly hid in the bushes at the side. Seeing this, Noah was basically certain. Whether or not this little girl was the so-called spirit, she must have stayed in the forest for quite some time. Otherwise, why would a normal child hide when they heard the strange sounds? The child in front of him must have known that there were all sorts of ferocious beasts in the forest, and that it would be very dangerous to encounter them. That was why she hid when she heard the strange sounds. Chapter 30. At this time, Noah had somewhat forgotten his original intention of coming here. He came to the bush where the little girl was hiding, squatted down, and gently parted the bush in front of him. In the next moment, the figure of a blue-haired little girl, hugging her knees and curling up into a ball, looking at Noah with a frightened expression, once again entered Noah's field of vision. Looking at Noah's face that suddenly appeared in front of her, the blue-haired little girl crawled back in horror, her face full of fear. Don't be afraid, I'm not a beast, nor am I a magical creature. I have no malice towards you. Noah tried to soften his tone as much as possible, with a gentle smile on his face, and extended his hand towards the blue-haired little girl. Come over here. looking at the face in front of her that was filled with a gentle smile. The fear in the blue-haired little girl's heart was incredibly reduced by more than half. Her pale face also regained some color, but she still stared at Noah's hand that was stretched out in front of her with a fearful expression, her petite body trembling slightly. Noah didn't rush the other party, but maintained the appearance of extending his hand with a smile, waiting for the blue-haired little girl to react. He didn't show the slightest bit of impatience, allowing time to gradually pass. The blue-haired little girl secretly observed Noah like this, and seemed to have determined that the other party wouldn't hurt her. She timidly extended her little hand, trembling, and placed it on Noah's extended hand. At the moment of contact, Noah and the blue-haired little girl both had different feelings. Noah felt that the little hand in the center of his palm was really too cold, so cold that it seemed to have lost the temperature that a human body should have, which made Noah very surprised. The blue-haired little girl had a completely opposite feeling, only feeling that the palm that embraced her little hand was really too warm, so warm that the blue-haired little girl couldn't help but have a trace of nostalgia. As a result, the blue-haired little girl's hand tightened uncontrollably, as if she was grabbing onto a life-saving straw. She held onto Noah's hand tightly. Under the night sky, in the forest, two children of different ages, one young and one old, held each other's hands tightly. In the absence of witnesses, they formed a bond that no one knew but was difficult to break. Late at night, in a quiet corner of the forest, a wisp of smoke floated into the sky. Carried by the wind, it drifted into an unknown distance. The blazing red bonfire emitted light and heat that dispelled the darkness and gloomy coldness. The game roasted beside the bonfire also emitted a fragrance that made one's stomach tighten. Beside the bonfire, the blue-haired little girl sat there, wolfing down the freshly roasted meat in her hand. Her little cheeks had already puffed up due to the excessive amount of food stuffed into her mouth. Along with her owner's chewing, she moved little by little, looking extremely adorable. Obviously, the blue-haired little girl hadn't seriously eaten a full meal for a very long time. After coming to this conclusion, Noah also allowed the little girl to continue eating in a way that would make people feel cute, while he sat quietly on the side, roasting the rest of the freshly hunted game, while observing the blue-haired little girl. The blue-haired little girl's name was Wendy Mabel. This was also something that Noah just found out. It was believed that no one would think that such a child would be a spirit. The same went for Noah. Therefore, seeing Wendy eating heartily, Noah was also happy to continue observing Wendy. In the end, he still couldn't see any signs of a spirit from this cute little girl in front of him. Unknowingly, time passed quietly. Although it was obvious that she hadn't eaten a full meal for a long time, Wendy was still a child after all. Moreover, she was still a girl. Her appetite wouldn't be that big. After finishing the small game in her hand, she seemed to be full. Holding her small hands, Wendy secretly sized up Noah. After a long time, she mustered up the courage to speak with a voice as soft as a mosquito. Thank you. Are you full?" Noah shook his head and waved the roasted game in his hand. "Do you need a little more?" No need." Noah shrugged indifferently and stuck the roasted game in his hand beside the bonfire, then looked at Wendy. "Then Wendy, can I call you this?" Wendy nodded her head, and then emphasized again. "I'll call you Big Brother Noah, can I?" "If you don't mind." Noah scratched his cheek and asked. "Then Wendy, why are you here? Why are you crying so sadly?" I've always lived here." Wendy's small face showed a sad expression, and her watery eyes began to moisten. I can't find my mother. I can't find Grandine." "Can't find your mother?" Noah sighed. "In other words, you're lost, right?" "No." Wendy shook her head and said, "I remember the way home, but Grandine is no longer there. Grandine suddenly disappeared and doesn't want me anymore." As she spoke, Wendy's moist eyes became misty. Drops of tears flowed out, and she began to sob. Even though Noah was usually able to control his emotions, he had never encountered a girl crying like this before. He was at a loss for what to do. He could only sit beside Wendy and pat her back, comforting her as if he was coaxing a child. "Wendy, don't cry. Tell me what your mother looks like. I'll help you find her, okay?" However, in the next moment, Wendy sobbed and said something that shocked Noah. Grandine is a dragon, a very, very gentle dragon. Dragon? Of course, no one knew of such an existence. Wendy's mother was a dragon? Wasn't that the same as Naz, who was raised by a dragon? You. At that moment, Noah said to Wendy in astonishment. You're also a dragon slayer archmage? Also. This time, it was Wendy's turn to look at Noah with a tear-stained face, letting Noah understand. The little girl in front of him, who was 4 or 5 years younger than him, was most likely the second dragon slayer archmage other than Naz. It was also very likely that she had also learned the ancient lost magic that was used to fight against dragons' dragon slayer magic. Since when did such a powerful magic become so worthless? Noah only had time to feel this way in his heart. In the next second, a sudden phenomenon interrupted his thoughts. Rumble. In the sky, a deafening sound of thunder suddenly resounded. Ah! The timid Wendy let out a scream and threw herself into Noah's arms without hesitation. Noah only hugged the slender and soft body in his arms reflexively. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Then, his pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle tip. Rumble. Amidst the thunderous roar, the clouds in the sky that were shrouded in darkness suddenly rolled up. It was as if there was a whirlpool in the middle, constantly sucking in the surrounding clouds and gradually rotating. Gradually, the entire sky of the forest was replaced by a huge vortex of black clouds. The center of the vortex was faintly emitting light and emitting a shocking roar. This scene was as if there was a hole in the sky. A hole in the sky. Tightly holding Wendy in his arms, Noah's face was full of uncertainty as he stared at the vortex-like sky. Could it be that this is the curse-like phenomenon that was summoned by the cries of ghosts that the village chief mentioned? Thinking of this, Noah couldn't help but look at Wendy, who was shivering in his arms, with a face full of fear. It seemed that Wendy didn't know what was going on with this strange phenomenon. Moreover, at the beginning, Wendy was also crying, but at that time, she didn't summon any strange phenomenon. Therefore, this strange phenomenon was definitely not caused by Wendy, at least not on purpose. At this time, the strange phenomenon in the sky changed again. Chapter 31. The whirlpool-like sky suddenly came to a standstill without any prelude. Even the center of the whirlpool was directly fixed there, and the light inside gradually dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this scene, Noah, who was just thinking about whether to leave or not, was stunned on the spot. Ooh! Under Noah's gaze, in the sky, a gust of wind blew from the huge whirlpool, as if it was higher than the sky. To be more precise, it should be said that it was blowing down from above the clouds, stirring up the whirlpool-like pitch-black clouds. Looking at this scene in a daze, and at the entire irregular sky that was stirred up into a mess, Noah was at a loss. Although, in order to be able to adapt to life as soon as possible, when he was just adopted by Makarov, Noah also worked very hard to learn the culture and knowledge of this world. Not only did he learn all the words in a short 2 to 3 months, he also learned a lot of knowledge related to the magic world. But such a development had long exceeded Noah's scope of understanding. It was no wonder that Noah was at a loss. However, the loss only lasted for a short period of time. After a while, Noah noticed. The whirlpool-like wind that stirred up the whirlpool-like sky seemed to be blowing down from a place higher than the clouds. But under Noah's outstanding sensing ability, the real driving force of this whirlpool-like wind was nowhere to be hidden. In Noah's sensing, the power that stirred up the whirlpool-like sky into a mess was a surge of magic that rose from the ground. Obviously, this was a man-made situation. Moreover, the location of the magic was not elsewhere, but in this forest, not far from Noah's location in the depths of the forest. Aware of this, Noah directly cast his gaze towards the place where the magic soared into the sky, and his eyes began to flicker. Should I go and take a look? Brother Noah. Wendy, who was in Noah's arms, seemed to have recovered from her fear. She pulled on Noah's clothes, and her big watery eyes stared straight at Noah's face, while her finger pointed to the sky. The sky, the atmosphere. Everyone has become so strange, so chaotic. Hearing this, Noah lowered his head in surprise and met Wendy's gaze. You can feel the state of the sky and atmosphere? Yes. Wendy nodded without hiding anything. I am the sky's dragon-slaying sorcerer. Noah was relieved. The Dragon Slayer magic was a powerful magic that transformed the user's physique into that of a dragon and was used to fight against and kill dragons. However, the Dragon Slayer magic wasn't just a single type of magic. Instead, it was like the entire magic system, having an entire series of spells. For example, Naz was a Fire Dragon Slayer Archmage and used the Fire Dragon Slayer magic. His entire person was like a fire dragon. Not only did he have super destructive power, he could also recover his mana and stamina by devouring flames. Wendy was the Archmage of the Sky's Dragon Slayer, so she was undoubtedly using the Sky's Dragon Slayer magic. Therefore, it wasn't strange for Wendy to be able to sense the state of the sky and atmosphere. Looking up, Noah looked at the whirlpool that had completely disappeared, and the sky that was gradually returning to its original calm state. Then, he looked at the source of magic that was gradually converging in the depths of the forest. After pondering for a moment, he stood up. Wendy, Noah said as he put Wendy down and pointed at the source of magic that was almost disappearing. I plan to go over there and take a look. I'll go with you, Wendy said without hesitation and tightly grabbed Noah's corner, looking like she was about to cry. Brother Noah, don't leave me alone. Okay. Noah could only smile bitterly and compromise, holding Wendy's hand. Don't worry, I won't leave you alone. Yes, Wendy smiled through her tears. Holding Wendy's hand and following his own senses, Noah tried to reduce the sound of his footsteps as much as possible and slowly walked towards the source of the whirlpool of magic that had completely disappeared. The surrounding darkness blocked most of Noah and Wendy's vision, and the surrounding trees and bushes were filled with the low roars of beasts. However, Noah was unwavering as he walked towards the source of the magic, while Wendy hid behind Noah, her face full of fear. Not long after, the two of them arrived at a vast open space. The magic that had stirred up the whirlpool in the sky was released from here. Now that magic had already disappeared, but Noah could clearly feel that in this open space, the existence of the same origin as that magic was still there. And it didn't disappear just like that. And in the center of that vast open space, there seemed to be a figure that was about the same size as Noah standing there, with its back facing Noah and Wendy. Wendy hid her small body behind Noah's back, only sticking out her head. Her small hand that was grabbing Noah's clothes and hand was getting tighter and tighter, as if she was nervous. Noah fully displayed his ability to control his emotions. The more he felt at this moment, the calmer he became. Holding Wendy's hand, he walked into the open space. Only after entering the open space did Noah see the back of the figure in the center of the open space. That was indeed the back of a figure that was about the same size as Noah. Moreover, the other party also had a head of dark blue short hair that was not much different from Wendy's. But from the other party's back, the other party should be a boy. From this boy, Noah felt the magic that he had just sensed. Needless to say, the magic that was stirring up the whirlpool-like sky was the doing of this person in front of him. Brother Noah. Wendy, who was hiding behind Noah, was very nervous and scared as she pulled Noah's hand. Noah stopped in his tracks and didn't turn back to look at Wendy. Instead, he stared at the back of the figure in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" The figure with its back facing Noah, and Wendy gently raised its head and turned around, exposing its face in front of Noah and Wendy. Looking at the face that was exposed in front of them, Noah was speechless for a moment, and Wendy's whole body trembled, showing even more fear. Because on the right side of the other party's face, there was a sinister tattoo that extended from the eye socket to the cheek, just like the eye of a devil. If this scene was seen in the daytime, it would be fine, but now, under the influence of the night and the atmosphere, this tattoo looked a little gloomy and made people feel very uncomfortable. Noah subconsciously protected Wendy behind him, and his other hand was already holding the strip-shaped cloth bag tightly, and his voice was a little cold. "Who are you?" The second time he asked, he still didn't get any response. However, Noah and Wendy were both stunned. Bang! The young man with the tattoo on his face suddenly went limp and fell to the ground, and didn't move at all. Ah! Wendy let out a small cry of surprise, and even Noah frowned. The scene suddenly became a somewhat strange silence. Brother Noah. Wendy poked her head out from behind Noah, and her young voice was full of confusion. That person, is he not feeling well? It's because I don't know if he is, or not, that big brother is a little troubled. Noah's face hung a helpless smile. I'll go take a look. Wendy, you wait here for a moment. Wendy hesitated, but she knew that Noah was doing this to protect her. Although she was very unwilling, she nodded obediently, let go of Noah, and ran to the side to hide behind a tree trunk. Noah then walked in the direction of the young man on the ground, and came to the other party's side, squatted down, stretched out his hand, and looked at the other party's condition. The young man on the ground was a little short of breath, and his face didn't look very good, and even looked like he was in slight pain. But his eyelids didn't tremble. This kind of state allowed Noah to easily determine what happened. Magic overused, so that's why he fainted, right? Noah pondered for a moment, and then seemed to have made a decision, and helped the other party up. Wendy, you live here, so you should know where there are caves and such, right? Wendy was stunned. Chapter 32. The next day, warm sunlight sprinkled down from the sky, driving away the gloomy coldness lingering in the forest. Finally, there was some summer heat under the sky. A young boy with a tattoo on his face woke up from his sleep and slowly opened his eyes. Just as he opened his eyes, the young boy heard a very cute, yet very young little cry of surprise. Big brother Noah, that person woke up. Who? The thorny young man abruptly opened his half-opened eyes. His body sat up like a loose spring. His face was full of vigilance as he looked around. The thorny teenager found himself in a cave of unknown origin. The cave wasn't very big, smaller than the room of an ordinary family. The young boy could clearly see the fierce sunlight outside the cave, and the surrounding walls of the cave. As for himself, he was lying on a protruding platform under the innermost wall of the cave. As for the entrance of the cave, the young boy saw two people. One of them was a boy of 11 or 12 years of age with short black hair, and eyes as deep as the stars. In front of him was a long cloth bag that seemed to contain some kind of weapon leaning on one of his shoulders. His whole body was emitting an extraordinary aura. The other was hiding beside the young boy. She poked her head out from the side of the young boy, and looked at him with eyes full of doubt, curiosity, and a trace of fear. She was about 7 or 8 years old. At this time, the young boy was sitting on the ground at the entrance of the cave with his back against the wall. He stretched out a hand and stroked the head of the little girl who was hiding beside him. At the same time, he turned his head to look at the young boy with a slight smile on his face. You're awake? The young boy didn't immediately respond, but the vigilance in his eyes lessened. After a moment of silence, he spoke softly. You are Noah Dole from Fairy Tale. You can call me Noah. Noah briefly introduced himself, and patted the head of the blue-haired little girl beside him. She is Wendy. Hi. Hello, Wendy said in a timid manner. Then she didn't say anything else. Fairy Tale. The spiky young man's eyes flickered a few times. He lowered his head, and hesitated for a moment, before introducing himself. My name is Jalal. Did you save me? I'm not the one who saved you. Noah shrugged and continued to pat Wendy's head. The one who saved you was Wendy. She was the one who used healing magic to help you recover. To be honest, even I was a little surprised. This was the truth. After all, the power of Naz's Dragon Slayer magic was really extraordinary. Even though Naz was still young and hadn't displayed its true power, its power was still so great that even ordinary magic shooters could only look up to it. However, the Dragon Slayer magic was a magic used to fight against dragons, so it was not surprising that it had this kind of power. But what Noah didn't expect was that Wendy's Dragon Slayer magic didn't have the great power of Naz's Dragon Slayer magic. Instead, it had the ability to assist and heal. According to Wendy herself, it was because Wendy herself wasn't good at fighting. Therefore, in the sky's Dragon Slayer magic, she mastered the auxiliary magic faster. On the contrary, she didn't even master the slightest bit of combat magic. It was not as destructive as Naz's. In other words, compared to Naz's fire dragon slayer magic, that was purely used for fighting, Wendy's sky dragon slayer magic could not only be used for fighting, but also could be used to assist in fighting and heal injuries through various effects. It was a very rare all-around magic. If Wendy was a little older, perhaps this boy named Jalal wouldn't have been unconscious for the whole night. He would have been able to wake up under Wendy's treatment last night. Of course, without Wendy's treatment, Jalal might not have been able to wake up now. Hearing Noah's explanation, Jalal himself looked at Wendy with some surprise, which made Wendy feel embarrassed. She buried her face in Noah's arms and didn't dare to look up. Seeing this, the little vigilance in Jalal's heart disappeared, and he sincerely thanked Wendy. "Thank you for saving me. I just helped a little," Wendy said shyly. "It was Brother Noah who carried you here. You should thank Brother Noah." "No need to thank me." Noah shook his head and looked straight at Jalal. "But if you can tell me the reason why there was such a strange change in the sky last night, I will be very grateful." Jalal's eyes narrowed. "You saw it all." "I was in the forest. It's impossible that I didn't see such a change in the sky, right?" Noah said with a smile. "And you don't look like someone who doesn't know about it. So can you tell me what it was?" "That's..." Jalal's face darkened, and his voice became heavy. "That was super subspace magic anima." "Anima?" Wendy tilted her head, a question mark appearing above her head. "Super subspace magic?" Noah frowned. "What the hell is going on?" Jalal lowered his head even more, and there was a look of struggle in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't tell you the details, so please don't ask anymore." Noah's frown deepened as he looked at Jalal's somewhat evasive and struggling eyes. After a while, his tightly knitted brows relaxed, and he began to speak. "As I said earlier, I am a magic shooter from Fairy Tale. This time, I came here because of a request from a nearby village. They said that in this forest, there is a wailing spirit that can cast a curse that can shatter the sky. And I am here to solve this inconceivable matter." Jalal and Wendy were both stunned. However, Jalal realized something from Noah's evasive words, and finally smiled. "You don't have to worry about that. Anima has indeed been triggered many times here, but I stopped it. The one last night should be the last time it was triggered. After this, Anima won't be triggered here again. As for the crying ghost, I don't know. I have solved the crying ghost." Noah didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he glanced at Wendy, who had a confused look on her face beside him. It is indeed a crying ghost, and it is quite cute. Now Noah finally understood the whole story. If he wasn't wrong, the crying ghost that the village chief mentioned was only the cry that Wendy made when she was looking for Grandine in the forest. As for why the sky would be cursed and split apart when the specter cried, that was purely because of the super secondary space magic, Anima, which no one knew what it was. In other words, Wendy's crying and the activation of Anima happened to coincide, which caused the villagers hunting in the forest to panic, leading to the incident of the crying ghost cursing the sky. Everything was caused by a coincidence and a misunderstanding. This made Noah couldn't help but find it funny, and he couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions. Sure enough, ghosts and whatnot didn't exist. Wendy, who didn't know, had a head full of question marks. Jalal, on the other hand, seemed to understand, and he also smiled helplessly. Since the truth has been revealed, and there won't be any more crying ghosts or anima in the future, my commission can be considered completed. The rest is none of my business, and I won't ask again. Noah stood up and skillfully reached out his hand to hold Wendy's hand, which was about to reach out in a hurry. Now I'm going back to the village. Do you want to come with me? Jalal looked at Noah gratefully, nodded, and stood up. The three of them walked out of the cave together and walked out of the forest. Chapter 33. The moderate temperature of the sun shone on the neither too large nor too small village. It also shone on the courtyard of an old hotel, covering a man and a woman in the courtyard with a layer of golden gauze. Ha! 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 Along with the loud and clear shouts, Noah held the knight's sword in his hand and slashed with the standard posture that he had practiced diligently for 3 months. Every slash created a flash of sword light and a sharp piercing sound in front of him, giving off a pleasing feeling to the eyes. Not far away, Wendy sat on the doorstep, her small hands supporting her cheeks. Her big watery eyes were fixed on Noah, who was waving his sword in the courtyard. She had a satisfied expression on her face, and her eyes never left Noah. This was the third day after Noah, Wendy and Jalal returned from the forest. On the first day back, Noah went to the village chief's house and told him that he had completed the mission. He asked the village chief to tell the villagers to go back to the forest to hunt as usual. The village chief naturally thanked Noah for his words and tactfully asked Noah to stay in the village for a few days. When the villagers who went into the forest confirmed that there were no more weeping ghosts and broken skies in the forest, they would pay him for completing the mission. This was a matter of course. Noah did not think that he could gain the village chief's trust with just a few words, so he took Wendy and stayed in the village's hotel. As for Jalal, Noah originally thought that he would leave directly, but in the end, Jalal also stayed and temporarily stayed in the village. Although according to my inference, anima should not be activated in this area anymore. But to be safe, it's better to stay and observe for a while. Just like this, Noah, Wendy and Jalal stayed in the village together, and also stayed in the hotel. It was worth mentioning that although the three of them stayed in the same hotel in the village, they only stayed in 2 rooms. Noah was the first person that Wendy met in her life. Now Wendy's mother Grandine had suddenly disappeared. Wendy had bitterly searched for her in the forest for several days, crying for several days. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was for a little girl who was less than 10 years old and didn't know how to deal with worldly affairs. Perhaps because of this, as the first person that Wendy met, and the first person who gave her warmth, Noah seemed to have a very high position in Wendy's heart in just 3 days. In addition, Wendy's only family member was missing, so in these 3 days, Wendy basically did not leave Noah for a moment. She even had to sleep in the same room and bed as Noah. Otherwise she would have a sad expression, as if she wanted to cry. She was completely attached to Noah. Unable to do anything, Noah could only let Wendy do as she pleased. Ha 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 ha. Rhythmic shouts sounded continuously, and the cold gleam of the blade flickered continuously in the courtyard. In these 3 days, Noah basically used all of his time to train his sword skills and control of mana. Compared to Magnolia, there were not many changes apart from the different location and the absence of Alusha as a sparring partner. Even outside, Noah did not forget to train himself. That was the only battle ability that he had at the moment. On the other hand, Wendy, who had been watching Noah practice his swordsmanship, caught a glimpse of someone approaching. After being stunned for a moment, she stood up and called out to Noah in a delicate voice. "Big brother Noah, Jalal is back." The knight sword in Noah's hand that had just swung down paused in midair, and did not follow the momentum of the attack. From this, it could be seen that Noah's sword skills had improved by leaps and bounds. Even Alusha would praise him if she saw this scene. Big brother Noah. It was unknown when Wendy had run to Noah's side. She held a towel in her hand and handed it to Noah. "Thank you." Noah took the towel, wiped his sweat, and patted Wendy's head. When Wendy showed a comfortable expression, he turned his head and looked at Jalal, who was walking over. "How is it? It's still stable." Jalal nodded. "There are no signs of anima continuing to activate in this place. I think it's safe here." Hearing this, Noah nodded. Even though they had been together for 3 days, Jalal still didn't show any signs of telling Noah about the super subspace magic anima. Therefore, Noah didn't know anything about anima either. However, from Jalal's words of "it's safe here," it could be inferred that if anima was successfully activated, it would definitely lead to a disaster not inferior to Noah's mana rampage. It was to prevent this disaster that Jalal appeared here. According to Jalal, he would continue to wander around the world, searching for the traces of anima, embarking on the journey of constantly closing anima that was about to be activated. Knowing this, Noah cast his gaze on Jalal. "Are you planning to leave?" Jalal opened his mouth and was about to say something, but a voice interrupted him. A guest from Fairy Tale. The newcomer was none other than the owner of the hotel, who had walked in from outside and stood in front of Noah. Noah looked at the owner of the hotel, looking at his hesitant look, frowned slightly, and asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen? The village chief asked me to bring a message to you." The owner of the hotel shook his head and said, "Not long ago, there were 3 white-haired children about your age who went to the village chief to ask about your whereabouts. Then they went into the forest and have not returned since. The village chief asked me to ask you, are those 3 your companions?" 3 white-haired children. Wendy and Jalal both looked at Noah at the same time, so they also clearly saw the sudden change in Noah's expression. "What's wrong?" Jalal asked. "Are they people you know?" "Kind of." Noah's expression was not good, and he asked the owner of the hotel, "You're saying that the 3 of them never came back after they entered the forest?" "No, they just never came back," the owner of the hotel answered honestly. "The villagers only saw the 3 people enter the forest, but they never saw them come out." Noah was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. Please thank the village chief for me." The owner of the hotel nodded with a smile and left. "Brother Noah." Wendy suddenly felt a little uneasy and tightly held the silent Noah's hand, not letting go. "Noah," Jalal asked, "do you need help?" Noah's expression changed a few times, and he finally sighed and pulled Wendy in front of him. "If you want to help me, could you please take Wendy to Grandini?" "Take Wendy to Grandini?" Jalal was a little surprised. "I don't want to." Wendy's little face turned pale, and she suddenly hugged Noah's leg. "I don't want to leave Brother Noah." Noah seemed to have expected things to turn out this way. He smiled helplessly and squatted down to pull Wendy in front of him again. "Wendy, be good, and let Jalal take you to Grandini, okay?" "I don't want to." Wendy threw herself into Noah's arms again and hugged Noah tightly, as if she would rather die than let go. "Brother Noah, don't be like Grandini and leave me alone." Hearing Wendy's words and feeling how hard Wendy was hugging him with her tiny arms, Noah was shocked. Although Noah liked Wendy, who was like a little sister to him, he really didn't expect her to be so attached to him. Thinking of this, Noah couldn't help but feel a little troubled. He stroked Wendy's thin back and said softly, "I don't want to separate from Grandini. I don't want to be separated from Wendy either. But don't you want to look for Grandini?" Wendy trembled. Chapter 34. Did she want to find Grandini? Wasn't the answer obvious? Although Grandini was a dragon, she had raised Wendy like a mother. She was the most important person to Wendy apart from Noah. Noah had indeed helped Wendy when she was at her most helpless. He occupied a very important position in Wendy's heart, so much so that she almost couldn't leave him. But if Wendy was asked if she wanted to find Grandini, of course she wanted to, didn't she? However, Wendy didn't want to leave Noah either. Even if it was only 3 days, Noah was still very important to Wendy. If Wendy had a choice, she definitely wouldn't want to leave Noah. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stuck to Noah for 3 days. I want to find Grandini." Wendy's delicate body began to tremble in Noah's arms. Even her voice trembled. It was obvious that her emotions were fluctuating greatly. But, I don't want to leave Big Brother Noah either. Leaving is only temporary. I won't suddenly disappear like Grandini. If Wendy wants to find me, it'll be very easy." Noah could clearly feel Wendy's heart wavering. He patted her back comfortingly and sighed. "I'm a sorcerer in fairy tale, and I'm not old enough to take charge of a guild yet. I can't accompany you all over the world to find Grandini. Originally, I wanted to bring you back to fairy tale and see if my companions in the guild could help. But now, Jalal wants to go all over the world to stop the activation of anima, and you have to go all over the world to find Grandini. Although your goals are different, the process is exactly the same." Noah glanced at the silent Jalal and smiled faintly. "If that's the case, why don't you let Jalal help you find Grandini? Isn't that good?" Wendy buried her little face in Noah's arms. She didn't say a word, but her delicate body kept trembling. It was obvious that she was still wavering. "Is that okay?" Jalal asked with a hint of worry. "Although what you said is not unreasonable, if we really encounter anima on the journey, it'll be too dangerous for Wendy to follow me. So to be honest, I don't agree." I believe you can take good care of Wendy. Noah met Jalal's gaze and stared at him closely. Can you promise me that no matter what the situation is, you'll ensure Wendy's safety? Looking at Noah's eyes that were as deep as the stars, Jalal felt a strong sense of responsibility. He took a deep breath and nodded firmly. I promise, no matter what, I will ensure Wendy's safety. Noah smiled freely and pulled Wendy away from his arms. He watched as she lowered her head, and her expression could not be seen clearly. Then he patted her head. If you really don't want to, I won't force you. Come with me to Fairy Tale. I'll definitely help you find Grandini. Wendy bit her lips. Her eyes were still filled with hesitation. To be honest, Wendy really didn't want to leave Noah. She was very tempted by Noah's suggestion. However, Wendy asked herself, was this really okay? Wendy believed that if she asked Noah for help, Noah would definitely do his best to help her find Grandini. However, it was because she trusted Noah so much and cared so much about him that Wendy didn't want to cause trouble for Noah. Wendy raised her head. First, she looked at Noah, who had a gentle smile on his face. Then she looked at Jalal beside her. Finally, she fixed her gaze on the fairy tale emblem on the back of Noah's hand. Wendy reached out and held Noah's hand that had the fairy tale emblem on it. After looking at the emblem for a while, she met Noah's gaze. Big brother Noah, will we meet again? When she said this, Wendy's eyes were filled with reluctance and determination. Noah, who clearly saw all of this, smiled knowingly. Fairy Tale is the most famous guild in the Fiori Kingdom. I believe that even in the future, the name of Fairy Tale will spread across the entire continent. There won't be a single person who doesn't know how to get to Fairy Tale. Noah touched Wendy's soft cheeks and said this with an unbelievably warm tone. If you miss me, come find me at Fairy's Tale. This time Wendy smiled. Her smile was unusually happy. I'll always miss you, big brother Noah. I believe that Grandini will also like you. You're both my favorite people. Wendy threw herself into Noah's arms and hugged Noah tightly again. However, this time, Wendy's strength was less sorrowful and more sentimental. Hugging Wendy's small body, Noah raised his head and said solemnly to Jalal, I'll leave Wendy to you. Jalal nodded, and the emotion in his eyes was sincere. I'll do my best. In the forest under the sun, the roars of beasts echoed everywhere, adding a dangerous atmosphere to the hot air. Noah, who was carrying a long cloth bag in one hand and slinging it over his left shoulder, was running in the forest at an extremely fast speed. He was like a cheetah that was dashing wildly in the forest. His speed was so fast that one could only see an afterimage as he nimbly dodged the trees that blocked his path. It was very astonishing. Even under such circumstances, Noah still diverted some of his attention to observe his surroundings and carefully listen to the sounds around him. He didn't miss any signs of movement. According to the villagers who were hunting in the forest, they once saw Mila, Elfman, and Lisanna noisily passing by as if they were looking for something. In other words, it was very likely that the Strauss siblings were still wandering around this area. Noah couldn't help but curse in his heart. Noah thought that the Strauss siblings had already known that he had completed the mission and had given up and left in the past 3 days. He didn't expect them to still be in the forest. It seemed that they hadn't given up on snatching the mission from Noah. Needless to say, the Strauss siblings hadn't gone out since they entered the forest 3 days ago. Otherwise, it was impossible for them to not know that the village chief had issued a notice in the village to allow the villagers to continue hunting in the forest. Aren't those siblings a little too stubborn? Noah more or less gnashed his teeth, but he didn't slow down in the slightest. Logically speaking, even if the Strauss siblings were still wandering around the forest, Noah didn't have to personally search for them, nor did he have to be in such a hurry to find them. But for some reason, Noah had a bad feeling in his heart. They wouldn't have encountered any danger, would they? There shouldn't be any magical creatures in the forest, so naturally, there shouldn't be any danger. But that wasn't for certain. Perhaps there was some magical creature that wasn't too weak, and the Strauss siblings couldn't deal with it. Noah could sense a rather strong mana from Mira, but Elfman and Lisanna didn't have any mana fluctuations at all. It was obvious that they hadn't started learning magic yet. It was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be any accidents. Most importantly, Noah believed in his premonition. If I find you guys, I'll definitely teach you a lesson. With such determination, Noah increased his speed. Roar! At this moment, a loud roar resounded from not far away. This voice. Noah stopped abruptly, his expression changing. I can't be that unlucky, right? As he said that, Noah leaped and rushed in the direction of the voice. Chapter 35. Roar. When Noah heard that loud roar once more, the owner of the roar finally entered Noah's eyes. Noah, who was charging forward at an extremely fast speed, clearly saw a 3-meter-tall giant with the head of a cow and the body of a human. It walked upright, holding a thick tree trunk in one hand, and a screaming child in the other, as it raised its head and roared. In front of the giant, there was a white-haired man and a woman. One of them was sitting on the ground, his face filled with horror, while the other was standing there, facing the giant with an anxious look on her face. The child who was being held by the giant and screaming was Lisanna. The one sitting on the ground with a face full of horror was Elfman. The one facing the giant was Mira, who was gnashing her teeth anxiously. As for the giant, it was an existence Noah was very familiar with. It was a very famous and ferocious demonic creature that had no rationality at all. In the forest of Magnoria, Noah had encountered these ferocious monsters more than once under the leadership of some sorcerers from the fairy's tale. Those were monsters that even ordinary sorcerers were extremely afraid of. Why would such a monster appear in a forest with only ferocious beasts? This was a question that Noah had no way of finding out the answer to, and he wasn't interested in finding out either. Roar! Sister Mira! Lisanna! The giant's roar, Lisanna's scream, and Myra's sorrowful cry rang out at almost the same time, causing Noah's starry eyes to slowly shrink as he increased his speed to the maximum. But even so, it would still take some time for Noah to reach the Strauss siblings and the gigantic bull-like figure. During this time, as long as the giant tightened its grip on Lisanna's hand, the cute little girl would be crushed to pieces and die tragically on the spot. There was no time. It was too late. Noah's heart began to beat faster. Without hesitation, he grabbed the cloth bag slung over his shoulder and pulled with force. In the next moment, the hilt of Noah's night sword poked out of the bag and was tightly grasped by Noah. However, Noah didn't immediately pull out the sword. Instead, he activated the vast amount of mana in his body and channeled it into the night sword through his hand. Wung! The night sword that had yet to be unsheathed shook in the scabbard and released a dense light. Clang! Mira, who was about to disregard her own life and risk her life to save Lisanna, didn't have time to act. The sound of a sword instantly filled every corner of the scene and turned into an echo that reverberated in the forest. Mira, who was confronting the giant, Lisanna, who was being held by the giant, and Elfman, who was limply lying on the ground, all three saw it. A streak of light. A streak of light suddenly shot out from a corner of the forest like a comet, flashing with dazzling light. The streak of light appeared out of nowhere and flashed past at a speed that made one's eyes blur. Amidst the sound of the air vibrating and exploding, it was like a meteor that fell from the sky and viciously crashed into the giant. Pfft! An extremely clear tearing sound reverberated in the air. What followed was a rain of blood that crazily sprinkled down like rain. The gigantic minotaur didn't even have the time to let out a blood-curdling screech. His 3-meter-tall body was torn open with his waist as the center. The upper and lower halves of the gigantic minotaur were completely separated from each other. The giant bull was cut into 2 halves. Whoosh! Scarlet blood sprinkled down from the sky and turned the scene into a pool of blood. Boom! The giant's upper and lower halves heavily smashed into the ground. Not only did blood splatter everywhere, but there was also a huge sound that caused the ground to tremble slightly. Mira and Elfman stood up in a daze, while Elfman's face was completely filled with fear as he screamed out loud. There was no helping it. The scene before them was simply too bloody. Looking at the blood-red ground in front of him, and the huge Tauren who was sliced into 2 halves, Elfman was still screaming in agony. Mira was the first to react. Lisanna. As soon as she said that, another calm voice sounded from the other side. Over here. Mira hurriedly looked over when she heard that voice. On the other side of the giant that was sliced in half, Noah carried the unconscious Lysana in one hand and held a knight's sword that was as dazzling as ice in the other. He looked at the giant that was sliced in half with a grim expression. Did I use too much strength? Mira finally understood. The person who sliced the giant in half was the same age as her, the youth that she looked down on. Moreover, he used a knight's sword that was more majestic than power. Although she didn't own one, it didn't mean that she hadn't heard of it before. In this world, there were many things that had all sorts of strange abilities and effects. Some were even equivalent to magical weapons. Some called them magic-conducting weapons, while others called them magical weapons. They were truly precious tools. The common point of these magical weapons was that they required the user to provide them with magical energy in order to activate their abilities and effects. The knight's sword in Noah's hand was flowing with magical energy. There was no need to guess that it could only be a magical weapon. The scene of the giant being sliced in half was still replaying in Mira and Elfman's minds. The siblings froze on the spot and couldn't say a word for a long time. On the other side, Noah had the same reaction. Of course, Noah didn't use too much magical energy in a moment of desperation, resulting in him using too much strength and cutting the giant in half. It was because he noticed Mira that he became like this. Noah stared at one of Mira's hands, and a solemn expression gradually appeared on his face. There was no other reason. It was because Mira's hand didn't look like a human's arm. Instead, it looked like the hand of a ferocious beast or a magical beast. It was ferocious and terrifying, and there was a dark aura that made Noah's heart palpitate. It was like the arm of a demon. Feeling Noah's gaze, Mira's expression changed. She seemed to remember her current appearance and couldn't help but hide her demon-like arm behind her back. Her delicate face turned ugly. The whole place was silent. This was the cave that Noah, Wendy, and Jalal stayed in 3 days ago. Now Wendy and Jalal were gone, but the number of people in the cave had increased instead of decreasing. Lysana had already woken up. She stayed with Elfman around the bonfire that Noah had lit. Looking in the direction of Noah and Mira, her face was full of worry and sadness. Noah and Mira were leaning against the wall on both sides of the cave in silence, as if they had deliberately distanced themselves from each other, keeping the furthest distance from each other. Noah had already sheathed his knight's sword and put it back into his pouch. He leaned against the wall and continued to stare at Mira with a thoughtful expression. Mira, on the other hand, was acting differently. She was different from the domineering aura she had when they first met 3 or 4 days ago. Now she was wearing a cloak and her body was exposed to the air. Only her demon-like arm was hidden behind the cloak. She didn't take it out and her face was dark. As such, the atmosphere in the cave became more and more oppressive. It was so oppressive that Lysana and Elfman almost couldn't breathe. Thus, Noah took the initiative to break the oppressive atmosphere. It's about time you tell me what's going on, right? Chapter 36. It's about time you tell me what's going on, right? Noah's words echoed clearly in the small cave, causing the atmosphere to turn from stifling to heavy. Noah had only thought of his encounter with the Strauss siblings as a chance encounter. Even though he was curious as to why they wanted to steal his job, he didn't intend to get too close to them. But now, Noah realized that he could no longer treat the 3 of them as passers-by. Not because of anything else, but because of the gloominess, sadness, and other emotions on the faces of the 3 Strauss siblings. Big brother Noah. At the side, Lysana wanted to say something with an anxious expression, but she only had time to call out to Noah before she was interrupted by Mira, who coldly opened her mouth. Lysana. Lysana immediately shut her mouth, her anxious expression turning into sadness, and even a hint of sorrow. Even Elfman had the same expression. Mira was the only one who no longer looked like a bad girl. Instead, she was as cold as ice. Seeing this, although Noah didn't know what the Strauss siblings were hiding, he understood what they were trying to do. Even though they were still young, Mira, Elfman, and Lysana, like Alyssa, had painful pasts that they couldn't bear to look back on. Sigh. Noah sighed. His voice was soft, but it echoed in the silent cave and entered the ears of Mira, Elfman and Lysana. "Even though I don't know what you're hiding," Noah said as he looked at Myra's hand hidden behind the cloak. "But I think it has something to do with that hand of yours, right?" Mira didn't say anything. Instead, she hid her face under the hood of her cloak, hiding her expression. "Noah," Elfman said hesitantly as he struggled to speak. Aren't you afraid of my sister? Big brother Elfman." Lysana tugged at Elfman's clothes as if she was blaming him for saying such a thing. However, she also looked at Noah with pleading eyes. Plead for what? Begging them not to be afraid of their elder sister? Noah frowned deeply as a thought flashed through his mind. "Don't you know why your sister's hand became like that?" This time, Elfman, Lysana, and even the silent Mira raised their heads. After being stunned for a moment, their faces lit up. "Big brother Noah." Lysana didn't care about anything else. She ran directly to Noah's side and held his hand tightly. Her face was anxious, but there was also a trace of hope. "Do you know why Sister Myra's hand became like that? That's not quite right." Noah's furrowed brows slowly relaxed as he looked at Mira. Myra's gaze happened to meet his. "Only you know what your sister went through to become like that. However, it seems like you only know a part of it." "A part?" Mira, Elfman, and Lysana muttered at the same time. "I don't like to know other people's secrets, and the things they don't like to talk about." Looking at the three Strauss siblings, Noah seemed to have guessed something and chuckled. "However, if you're willing to share with me, I think I can be a good listener, secret protector and solver." The three Strauss siblings fell silent. Big sister Mira, Elfman and Lysana both turned to look at their big sister, hesitating to speak. Seeing this, Mira lowered her head and didn't say anything. It was only when the siblings were getting impatient that she began to speak in a low voice. "There was a very powerful demon in the church in the village we used to live in. Because he caused the villagers to feel fear and despair, I wanted to see if I could destroy him, so I approached the church." Sister Mira was possessed by a demon in order to destroy the demon that brought harm to the village. Perhaps she could hear the emotions in her sister's voice, so she bit her lip and said loudly, "However, everyone in the village regarded my sister, who had destroyed the demon, as a demon and drove us out of the village. Sister didn't do anything wrong at all." Elfman, who was slightly timid, said indignantly, "Undoubtedly she destroyed the demon, but everyone treated her like that. Everyone is too much." "Enough, Elfman." Myra's emotionless voice sounded once more. "It's useless to say anything now. We can't return to the village anymore." Elfman and Lysana looked dispirited, and Noah more or less understood what was going on. Noah placed the pouch containing the knight's sword on the wall and stood up. Under the gaze of the three siblings, he squatted in front of Mira and extended his hand. "Give me your hand." Mira frowned. Just as she was about to turn away and ignore Noah, she heard Noah raise his voice. "Give me your hand." The slightly unyielding and indescribably calm voice made Mira recall the scene of the giant being cut in half in the forest. Her eyes trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but extend her hand. Apart from the night he met Wendy, this was the second time Noah had touched the hand of a member of the opposite sex. However, compared to Wendy's cold and tender hand, Myra's hand only gave Noah one feeling. It was coarse, but it couldn't be helped. After all, it wasn't Myra's original hand. He didn't know if it was a crocodile, lizard, or both, but Myra's hand was covered in scales. Her fingers were sharp like the claws of a malicious spirit, and the shape was also abnormally sinister. Coupled with the faint aura of darkness emanating from it, there was no normal person who wouldn't be afraid of such a hand. To plant such a hand on a girl who was adorable in all aspects was not only unworthy, but also extremely cruel. Even Mira wanted to withdraw her hand after regaining her senses. However, Noah held her hand tightly and stroked the sinister scales without a hint of disdain. His actions were abnormally gentle, and Myra's heart, which was shrouded by the trauma of what happened to her, relaxed. Her movements also slowed down. Noah first touched the scales on Myra's hand, using his outstanding sensing ability to sense the dark aura on them. It wasn't until he sensed traces of Myra's mana from the aura that he was finally able to confirm his guess. First of all, I have to tell you that your hand didn't become like this, because you were possessed by a demon. This sentence made the hearts of the three Strauss siblings tremble. Really? Lisanna couldn't help but stand up and ask with some excitement. In other words, Sister Mira didn't become like this because she was possessed by a demon, right? Then why did Sister's hand become like this? Elfman hurriedly asked. Do you have a way to help Sister's hand return to its original state? Mira was also staring at Noah. Her eyes were filled with hope and fear at the same time. Help your sister return to its original state. This time, it was Noah's turn to be confused. He looked at Elfman in puzzlement. Is there no way to return this hand to its original state? But when I met you in the inn, wasn't your sister's hand normal? That's the effect of a magic tool, Lisanna explained. It's a magic tool that can confuse people's vision. We obtained that tool by chance, but it can only be used once. When we were attacked by that magical creature, Sister Mira removed the tool's effect in order to protect us. Now we can't use it anymore. Chapter 37. The effect of a magical item? Noah nodded and looked at Mira. In other words, you have no way of controlling your own magic. Magic. Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna were stunned. Although I've never seen it before, I've read about it in books. Noah explained slowly as he continued to stroke Mira's sinister arm. In the magic world, there is a kind of magic that can be used to receive the power of animals, monsters, or even magical creatures. It can transform one's own physique into the physique of animals, monsters, or magical creatures. It can reproduce the power of animals, monsters, or magical creatures in one's own body. It is called receiving magic. You're not possessed by a demon. Noah met Mira's gaze. You must have accidentally received the power of the evil demons in the church of your village, and thus awakened the receiving magic. Awakened? Bewilderment was written all over the faces of the Strauss siblings. If a human wants to learn magic, there are two ways. Noah nodded. One is to learn the magic that one likes through independent learning, and thus become a magic shooter who can use that magic. The other is through independent awakening. Everything in the world has a type of chi called magic flowing through their bodies. That's what determines whether a person can use magic or not. Noah explained patiently. And in every person's body, there's a type of magic that can best reflect them. There's a certain chance of self-awakening under certain circumstances. In Mira's case, she should have awakened receiving magic on her own, when she came into contact with a demon from the church, and obtained the demon's power. That's why she became like this. Elfman and Lisanna didn't know much, but they knew that their sister wasn't really possessed by a demon. Although they didn't say anything, their faces were brimming with excitement. As for Mira, her eyes dimmed even more. Demon's power, Mira said mockingly, as she looked at her sinister arm that resembled a demon's. This kind of power? I don't need it. The cave that had more or less regained some liveliness immediately fell into a strange silence. The atmosphere was once again oppressive. Noah narrowed his eyes and smiled indifferently. Why? Isn't it a good thing to have power? A good thing. Mira tightened her grip on Noah's hand, a trace of hatred appearing in her eyes. Because of this power, I'm no longer human. How is that a good thing? Sister Mira, Elfman and Lisanna both had pained expressions on their faces. Being chased out of the village with Mira, and then wandering around with Mira, without a fixed place to stay. One could imagine the hardships and pain they had gone through. Elfman and Lisanna were very clear how difficult it was for Mira. After all, the reason why she had such painful memories was because she had obtained the demon's power. Under such circumstances, how could Mira not be disgusted with herself for having such power? That was why, even though she knew that she wasn't possessed by a demon, she still couldn't let it go. Elfman and Lisanna didn't know what to say about that. They could only worry in their hearts. Not human? Noah gazed at Mira, as though he could see through all her thoughts. After a while, he released his hand that was stroking Mira's ferocious demon arm. So according to what you're saying, everyone who can use magic is no longer human? Mira did not notice that Noah's gaze, which was enough to see through people's hearts, was on her body. Her delicate face was filled with extreme sarcasm. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Before Mira could finish her sarcastic words, Noah's sudden words mercilessly shut her up. At least, in my opinion, you don't have any reason to hate yourself for having power. Nor do you have any reason to resent the power you have. You're just deceiving yourself, throwing a tantrum, and being willful. What? What did you say? As expected, Myra's expression changed because of Noah's merciless words. The negative emotions that had accumulated in her heart for a long time were all detonated by Noah's words. You don't know anything at all. What right do you have to say that? Sister Mira. Seeing Myra's angry expression, Elfman and Lisanna were shocked. They seemed to want to go up and comfort her, but they were stopped by Noah. You're the one who doesn't know anything. Noah looked at Mira with an intense gaze. If I were you, I wouldn't hate this power. Instead, I'd be grateful for it. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have the right to protect your family in front of that giant magical creature. The anger on Myra's face froze in an instant. I don't know what kind of cruel treatment you received in your village. I also don't know how difficult your life was after you left the village, Noah said calmly. But I know what it feels like to hate your own power. At this point, Noah couldn't help but recall the time when he was first adopted by Makarov and joined Fairy's Tale. Although our experiences are different, I'm similar to you. There's a powerful force in my body that I can't control. This force almost brought unimaginable disaster to my family and friends more than once. So one day, I suddenly thought, why do I have to have this kind of power? Wouldn't it be great if I didn't hate this extra power? Noah looked directly at the stunned Mira. However, just as I was thinking about it, my grandfather said that there's nothing wrong with having power, and there's no reason for people to hate people who have power. However, if you use your power in a way that makes people hate you, that's the real mistake. Since that day, I've never hated the fact that I have power, because I'll never use my power for something that people hate. Noah stood up, ignoring the gazes of the Strauss siblings behind him, and walked to the cloth bag he put on the wall. Receive magic is magic that can receive the power of animals, monsters, and magical creatures for your own use. But I've never heard of anyone's receive magic that can even receive the power of demons. This is enough to prove that you have a special talent, and you'll definitely have extraordinary power in the future. How to use this power? You should think about it carefully and not blindly deny it. Of course, you can also choose not to use this power. After all, it's magic. If you can learn it, you can abandon it. But if you do this, I hope you won't regret it when you need power. Picking up the cloth bag on the wall, Noah sat down and closed his eyes. I just want to say, cherish this power. It can protect your family for you. After saying that, Noah did not speak again. He closed his eyes as if he had fallen asleep, and the cave returned to silence once more. Seeing Noah leaning against the wall and resting with his eyes closed, Mira clenched her demon arm tightly, her eyes filled with the strongest of emotions. Sister Mira. Elfman and Lisanna looked at their sister worriedly and came to her side. Mira was completely unaware of it and looked absent-mindedly at Noah, who was resting with his eyes closed. Her heart could not calm down for a long time. Even so, time still flowed on its own, and the activity of the world did not stop at all because of this. Even if something extraordinary happened in that small cave, night still fell, announcing the end of the day. However, for Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna, the night would definitely not be ordinary, but it would also be difficult to endure. Chapter 38. This is delicious. Brother Elfman, don't eat so fast. But it's really delicious. Really. Water. Water. Seeing Elfman choking and Lisanna panicking, Noah couldn't help but facepalm. At daybreak, Noah, the Strauss siblings returned to the nearby village and returned to the inn. A day later, Wendy had left the village with Jalal and embarked on a journey to find Grandine and stop the activation of anima. After 3 to 4 days of living in the wild, the Strauss siblings finally returned to a place with people. However, What surprised Noah was that the Strauss siblings didn't have the money to stay in the inn, nor did they have the money to eat. That was to be expected. Before the Strauss siblings were driven out of the village, they weren't rich. The three of them depended on each other for survival. During this period of time, they had already spent all the money they had brought out from home. It was precisely because of this that when the Strauss siblings heard that the village had issued a commission to expel the ghosts in the nearby forest, they gave the magical item to Mira to use to hide the demon's arm, and came to the village to accept the commission to earn some living expenses and travel expenses. Who would have thought that when the Strauss siblings were ready, they would come to the village and find the village chief, only to be told by the village chief that someone had already accepted the job. Only then did the Strauss siblings come to the village to look for trouble and snatch the job. It was no wonder that the Strauss siblings were so stubborn about the commission, to the point that they searched for Noah in the forest for 3 days, and still weren't willing to return. If they couldn't snatch the commission, the Strauss siblings wouldn't even be able to afford a meal. That would be terrible. Of course, after knowing the beginning of the matter, Noah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he didn't gossip because of this and simply ordered a table of dishes for the Strauss siblings, who had been eating wild game in the forest for several days, to have a good meal. After returning to the village chief sent someone to inform Noah that he had already acknowledged that Noah had completed the commission they issued, and gave him all the compensation of 200,000 J in one go. In addition to the 1 million J he had left behind for activating the ritual lake. While Noah didn't bring it all with him, treating others to a good meal wasn't a problem. He wouldn't be stingy to the point of leaving someone in the lurch. However, if possible, Noah still hoped that Elfman could restrain himself and eat a little quietly. Noah glanced at Mira, who was sitting at the side with a cloak covering her body. She was eating silently with only one hand stretched out, and Noah was not used to it. Last time, you rushed over like a delinquent girl and threatened to snatch my job. This time, you're so obedient. How unsettling. Mira continued to eat silently, seemingly not hearing Noah's muttering. On the other hand, Lisanna, who was sitting further away from Noah, heard a little. She secretly observed Mira, then moved closer to Noah's ear and said, "Actually, ever since she was possessed by a demon. No, since she received the power of a demon and awakened her magic, Sister Mira has never smiled or talked much. She was so rude last time, because she wanted to appear strong in front of outsiders and protect us," Lindley said. "Is that so?" Noah smiled and nodded without batting an eyelid. His words were not as secretive as Lisanna's. "I think demons definitely don't have such a delicate side. Only humans would change themselves for their family." Mira, who was eating, paused for a moment, then recovered and continued eating as if nothing had happened. Lisanna nodded gratefully at Noah, then turned her gaze to Elfman, who was wolfing down his food. Her expression immediately became angry, and she started arguing with Elfman. The entire meal basically went into Elfman's stomach. Only the sound of Elfman eating, Lisanna's curious questioning of Noah, Noah's occasional conversation, and Myra's silence could be heard. "Since you're full, what plans do you have for the future?" Noah took a sip of his drink and looked at the Strauss siblings. "You don't have any extra money, right? You can't go on like this, right?" "This." Lisanna and Elfman looked at each other, and Myra's eyes flickered slightly. It was clear that the Strauss siblings didn't have any good plans at the moment. Noah tapped the table rhythmically, his gaze sweeping past Mira, Elfman and Lisanna. After a while the corner of his mouth curled up. "How about it? Do you want to try fairy tale? Go to fairy tale?" Not to mention Lisanna and Elfman, even Mira was clearly moved for a moment. It had to be said that the Magic Guide Guild really was a good place for the Strauss siblings. Mira, Elfman, and Lisanna didn't have a fixed residence, and apart from each other, they had no one else to rely on. If they wanted to survive, they had to have a stable income. However, even if the Strauss siblings wanted to work and earn money, age was a huge issue. Ordinary jobs wouldn't consider hiring children at all. Otherwise, the Strauss siblings wouldn't have to suffer so much. The Magic Guide Guild, on the other hand, didn't care so much. As long as they were able to use magic and had a certain level of strength, they would be able to complete the corresponding tasks and receive remuneration. Moreover, the remuneration was much better than ordinary jobs. Mira was able to use receive magic and receive the power of a demon. Being able to face off against a huge monster showed that her strength was definitely not a problem. Joining the Magic Guide Guild definitely wouldn't be a problem. The problem was that Elfman and Lysana hadn't learned magic and were just ordinary children. In Fairy's Tale, there are many children of your age who are still learning magic. So even if you don't know magic, you can still learn it after joining the guild, Noah said as he spread his hands. I myself am a magic shooter from Fairy Tale. Personally, I feel that there won't be too much of a problem if you all join Fairy Tale. It's not a bad place to go. Of course, the decision is in your hands. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Elfman and Lysana hesitated. In the end, they looked at Mira and waited for her decision. Mira looked at Noah and coincidentally met Noah's half-smile. She couldn't help but recall the scene in the cave in the forest when Noah gently stroked her disgusting arm. Her heartbeat quickened for no reason, and she avoided Noah's gaze. Under such circumstances, the scene became strangely quiet. After who knew how long, Mira raised her head and took a deep breath. Let's go to Fairy's Tale. Elfman and Lysana looked at each other and said in unison, Sister Mira, where are we going? We'll go where you go. Myra's heart warmed, and she revealed a rare smile. Seeing this, Noah smiled knowingly and had a good impression of the Strauss siblings. Even if there were painful memories that no one knew of, even if they were in an extremely difficult situation, the three siblings would never leave each other and rely on each other. They would never give up on each other, and there was never a moment when they didn't think of each other. The ties of family would definitely be with them for the rest of their lives. It would be the medicine that would allow them to escape their pain, their predicament, and their past. Noah believed in this. Chapter 39. In his days, Noah realized that he was in a very inconceivable place. This was a place that was as vast as the sky, but also as if he could reach out and touch the boundaries of space. It was as light as water, as elegant as floating in the clouds. It was a very wonderful place. The sky was white. The ground was white. Everything that appeared in front of Noah's eyes was white. A vast expanse of whiteness, but it gave Noah a warm feeling. That feeling was as if he had returned to his mother's body and was in the amniotic fluid. It was very wonderful. Undoubtedly, there was nothing here. But Noah did not feel lonely, did not feel lost, did not feel cold in his heart, and instead felt warm. If this could not be called wonderful, then what could be called wonderful? However, in this vast expanse of whiteness, it was not that there was nothing. Other than Noah, in this world, there were other wonderful existences. Feathers that fell from the sky. Feathers that were suspended in bubbles that fell from the sky. Feathers that were covered and shrouded in white halos that were suspended in bubbles that fell from the sky. If it was said that this world gave Noah a warm feeling, as if he had returned to his mother's body, then these feathers that were falling from the sky, emitting a faint light, gave Noah another kind of warmth that was similar, yet not quite the same. How should he describe it? If he had to give an example, then it would be like family. Yes, Noah could be sure that these unbelievable feathers in front of him seemed to be his family. Thus, looking at the feathers that were falling from the sky, suspended in bubbles, hovering in the air, emitting a white halo, Noah revealed a smile of joy from the bottom of his heart. However, in the next second, a brand new scene appeared in front of Noah's eyes, causing the smile on Noah's face to completely disappear. A new family descended from the sky. They were still the same feathers that were suspended in bubbles. However, these feathers not only lost their bright white halo, but also became fragmented, as if they had been broken, and did not have the vitality that they should have had. Following that, the feathers that had lost their vitality replaced the intact feathers, and floated in front of Noah, gathered around Noah, and floated back and forth. It looked as if they were asking for help. Brother Noah, Brother Noah. A sweet and tender familiar voice gently echoed in Noah's ears. At the same time, Noah also felt that his body was constantly being shaken. The sleepy Noah woke up from his dazed state. He slowly opened his eyes and stared blankly at the source of the voice. What entered Noah's eyes was an extremely cute little girl. She was around 11 or 12 years old and wore a cute red dress. She had short white hair that was as clean as snow, and although her face was small, it was very delicate and cute. It was not difficult to imagine the beauty that the owner of this face would have when she grew up. Facing such an incomparably cute face, Noah's eyes still did not focus, and he could only blankly mumble, "Lisanna. It's Lisanna, brother Noah." Lisanna's pretty face had a worried expression. Just as Noah was about to wonder why she had such an expression, Lisanna reached out her hand and touched Noah's cheek, wetting her hand. Wait a minute, wetting? Only then did Noah realize that he did not know when, but tears had actually flowed out of his eyes, wetting his cheeks. I am crying? Brother Noah. Lisanna helped Noah wipe away the tears on his face as she spoke worriedly. Did you have that dream again? Hearing this, Noah could not help but smile helplessly. Yes, this was not the first time Noah had experienced the white dream in his sleep. Or rather, ever since Noah had gained his own consciousness, the first scene, dream, and memory that Noah experienced was that white dream. Even meeting Makarov was after that dream. Since then, Noah would have that strange dream every once in a while, experiencing the warmth of the dream and the sadness of the dream's end. That was the kind of heartbreak and grief that would only be felt by those broken feathers in the dream. Thus, whenever Noah had that dream and woke up from it, the sadness would cause Noah to shed tears that he had never shed for anything else. Only Lisanna, who had overbearingly snatched Gray's job ever since she joined Fairy Tale, would know about this matter. She would wake Gray up every day. Apart from Lisanna, even Noah's grandfather, Makarov, didn't know about this, let alone Gray, who came to wake him up every day, but never entered the room before Noah woke up. Even Lisanna had only discovered it when she snuck into Noah's room in the morning to play a prank on him, while Noah was still asleep. Seeing the pained look in her beautiful eyes, Noah revealed a rather steady smile and patted her head. Why are you showing such an expression? Lisanna said in a somewhat awkward manner. Whenever I think of Big Brother Noah having such sad dreams, I feel uncomfortable. How many times have I told you that it's not a sad dream? It's just that the feeling it gives is very strange and inexplicable. It affects my emotions quite a bit. Noah smiled bitterly and crawled out of the blanket, sitting up and stretching. You're still young, why are you so emotional? It's because Big Brother Noah is too slow and doesn't understand a girl's heart. Lisanna puffed up her cheeks and pulled Noah up from the bed. All right, Big Brother Noah, hurry up and get up. Almost everyone in the guild is here, and you're still sleeping in. Yes. Noah couldn't do anything about the carefree Lisanna. He allowed her to look for clothes for him and rush him to wash up like a worried sister. Ever since she joined Fairy Tale and found out that she was living alone in the guild, she had become like a little sister who was always worried about her. At first, Noah wasn't used to it, but as time passed he got used to it. Now if she didn't wake him up in the morning, Noah would feel uncomfortable. From this point alone, it could be seen that she was quite successful. Naturally, she became one of the few people in Fairy Tale who had a good relationship with Noah. Noah could not help but mutter to himself as he watched Lisanna skillfully take out the clothes that she had just washed yesterday and was going to wear today, while humming a pleasant tune. Why does it seem like she's so happy every time she's busy in my room? Lisanna, who was helping Noah choose clothes for the day, turned her head in confusion. Big Brother Noah, did you say something just now? Looking at her humming a nice tune, Noah let out a long sigh. Nothing. Fairy Tale was as noisy as ever. While chatting with her, Noah arrived at the familiar bar on the first floor. As soon as he went down the stairs, two shadows pounced on Noah. Noah! Noah sighed again as he listened to the passionate battle cry and watched the two black figures gradually approaching him. The moment the black figures pounced on him, he stretched out his hands and grabbed their heads one by one. Then he pulled them back to the center. Bang! With a loud collision sound, the two heads slammed into each other. After a moment of stiffness, they fell softly to the ground. One of the heads was cherry red while the other was black. Apart from Naz and Gray, who else could it be? Chapter 40. The moment the loud collision sounded, everyone in the guild turned their gazes in the direction of the sound. When they saw Naz and Gray lying on the ground with a bump on their heads and circles around their eyes, everyone immediately retracted their gazes, as if nothing had happened, and started talking to each other. It couldn't be helped. This kind of scene happened almost every day in the guild, and the sorcerers in the guild had long been used to it. Not to mention the sorcerers in the guild. Even Noah himself was used to it. He just habitually sighed and greeted as if nothing had happened. Good morning. Good morning. The other members of the guild began to greet him one after another. Good morning. Noah and Lysana. In the crowd, 3 girls of the same age as Noah also came over. One of them was wearing a cold armor with a plain dress inside. Another one was wearing a revealing leather outfit, like a delinquent girl. Another one was wearing a simple plaid dress with her long black hair, tied into a ponytail. The one wearing the cold armor was naturally Alusha. The one wearing the revealing leather outfit was Mira. As for the one with the long black hair tied into a ponytail, she was called Kana. Kana Alberona was a person who joined Fairy Tale earlier than Noah, Alusha and even Gray. You really don't learn your lesson every day. Alusha put her hands on her waist and looked at Naz and Gray on the ground, criticizing them seriously. If you want to defeat Noah, you should at least be more prepared. Rushing up like this is just a sneak attack. Even if you win, it doesn't count as strength. Ai, Alusha. Naz's whole body trembled as he clutched the bump on his head with a teary look. Don't stop me. I must defeat Noah today. This way, I can prove that I am stronger than Gray. Who are you saying is stronger than me? Gray also clutched the bump on his head and curled his lips in disdain. The one who defeated Noah will definitely be me. It's impossible for a stinky flame like you to do that. But you were knocked down by Noah in an instant. Kana glanced at Gray, who was only wearing a pair of shorts, and said in distress. Also Gray, where are your clothes? Oh no. Gray was shocked. By the way, Noah, did you ask Lysana to wake you up again? Mira couldn't help but feel annoyed when she saw the smiling Lysana hiding beside Noah. Don't order my sister around like a servant. It's just Noah. First of all, I didn't ask her to wake me up. She came on her own accord. Noah rubbed his aching glabella. Secondly, Mira, what's up with that insignificant Noah? Noah is very strong. Alusha retorted. Mira, are you insulting Noah? Tisk. Mira crossed her arms and said disdainfully. What does it have to do with you? What a tough woman. Alusha's forehead was instantly imprinted with the word well. She looked at Mira with a fake smile. Are you insulting me? A woman who shows her belly button. You want to fight? Mira laughed nastily and raised her fingers. Just in time. Today, I must teach you a lesson, you ice-cold guy. Oh. Alusha's face was filled with murderous intent. If you think you can do it, then come and try. Suddenly, the 2 girls' gazes seemed to have turned into solid electricity and collided fiercely. Their bodies emitted a demonic aura that sent chills down one's spine. So scary. Naz and Gray hugged each other without any backbone. It can't be. Kana also took a few steps back. Are they going to fight again? This isn't called a fight, it's called causing trouble. Noah found that his head was getting more and more painful. Why do these 2 people dislike each other? Isn't this good? Lysana looked at Mira, who was entangled with Alusha, with a gentle gaze. Compared to the old Mira, the current Mira is much more cheerful, isn't she? When they first arrived at Fairy's Tale, Mira was basically the same as the old Alusha. She didn't talk to others and never smiled. She only hid in a corner with a cloak, as if her existence was dispensable. However, later on, as Lysana and Elfman learned receiving magic, Mira finally gradually accepted the power of the demon in her body, and was no longer so isolated. Moreover, as Mira familiarized herself with receiving magic, her demonized arm also returned to its original state. Not long after, Mira became an out-and-out delinquent girl, just like when she first met Noah. Unfortunately, Perhaps because Noah had told Mira and Alusha in private that they behaved very similarly when they first joined the guild, the two began to dislike each other. As a result, the second pair of enemies in Fairy's Tale was born. By the way, the first pair was Naz and Gray. Noah's expression eased a lot, but his headache didn't lessen at all. Isn't this too cheerful? Ahahaha. Lisanna laughed. Really? Undoubtedly, Mira is very gentle, but she doesn't want to show it. She's always pretending to be strong. Won't she not be able to get a boyfriend like that? Although whether or not she's gentle has yet to be verified. Isn't it too early to think about getting a boyfriend? Noah was a little embarrassed. Mira is only 13 like me, right? You're already thinking about such things at the age of 13. That's how girls are. Lisanna raised her head slightly and met Noah's gaze. Her gaze became as clear as the surface of a lake, swaying gently. Actually, 11-year-old girls are the same, brother Noah. Noah felt a little uneasy and panicked for some reason. He couldn't help but look away. You're right. You're right. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. However, at this moment, Noah suddenly felt a tender little hand squeezing into his hand and clasping his hand tightly. Noah was shocked and subconsciously looked in Lisanna's direction again. Lisanna still raised her head and looked at Noah with eyes full of enthusiasm. The hand that squeezed into Noah's hand and held his hand tightly was naturally Lisanna's hand. Faced with Lisanna's behavior, Noah could only look away. This wasn't the first time Lisanna did such a thing. When did it start? Noah himself didn't know. He only knew that sometimes, especially when they were alone, Lisanna would occasionally show such an aggressive side, as if she was launching an attack on Noah. Many times Noah was at a loss. Surprisingly, Noah couldn't hate Lisanna like this, but it was inevitable that he felt embarrassed. Thus, Noah could only take out the weapon he always used at this time. What are you talking about? Noah put his empty hand on Lisanna's small head and rubbed it. Undoubtedly, it's just Lisanna. Don't act like you know. Wah. Lisanna began to struggle. Brother Noah, you're so annoying. You're like this every time. Who told you to always tease me? You should be punished. It's not a tease. Brother Noah is an idiot. You actually said I'm an idiot. Look at my... Wah. Wah. Damn Noah. Mira, who was wrestling with Alusha, was furious. She abandoned Alusha and rushed over here. You're not allowed to bully Lisanna. Do you want to escape? Seeing that Mira abandoned her, Alusha was also angry and rushed over. Oh, I'm burning up. Fighting? Count me in. Naz and Gray rushed over full of blood. Get out of my way. Then, the furious Alusha and Mira sent them flying with a punch each. For a time, the whole scene was a mess. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.